elite group into the ground, for which he was paid millions. That's good.
Okay, so let me just make a couple of remarks as we begin here today. One of the ideas that I have here is to kind of frame this consistently around a montage, if you will. On the one side, we'll have some of the Wall Street discoveries and how capital is really moving in finance capital through their own theorists, their own practices, etc. And then the other part of the montage, if you will, the montage analytic, would be that of the critical apparatuses at work through Marx in the third volume of Capital on fictitious capital and the banking components that we should have looked at for today, as well as Hilferding's finance capital, as well as Simmel's philosophy of money. And we'll try to bring that critique up to date. So if you can hold in your mind, like Ivan Karamazov, 2 points of view simultaneously, we'll maybe, get somewhere. Yeah, what were you going to say?
Marx has a lot of, he's quoting a lot of...
yes, he's using a lot of these people.
Yeah.
So, I'm trying to do sort of the same thing, but I'm not going to accomplish what the old man did. But at the same time, this is part of the problem on the left. The left only reads the left. It doesn't really read the right, or it really doesn't read the newest documents that are out there. And I'll give you a little background story to this where I really learned this in a very fundamental way. I remember talking to someone I knew that occasionally took classes at Johns Hopkins. He would come to sit in. He was a banker, a vice president of Maryland National Bank then. And he gave me a paper written by someone at the now defunct Dillon Reed, which is an old line WASP, Wall Street banking house, by a man named Francis Kelly. And it was an 80-page thing at the beginning of the neoliberal era, right before Reagan is elected. And it was on, those people who will economically survive will understand revolution. And his working premise was that you have to read Hannah Arendt's On Revolution to understand the world and actually go forward. And he wrote a very long, not well crafted or whatever, but a very long essay that circulated obviously in investment houses during this period. So from there you began to have the Reaganomics, you began to have this whole new sets of policies that, obviously codified new tax laws, and the advent, if you will, of the policy making of neoliberalism, although I think neoliberalism opens up, and I'm not really crazy about the term, but anyway, all to say, the shift that took place in 71, 73, then is solidified and is now being solidified more and more by, the combination of the state alongside of that. The state is agency really in all of this, ultimately, because the state has become integral, to capital's order. This is why they take the state. The right is not stupid. They took the state, and they've had control of it since Nixon, really. Yeah. And Nixon looks like a communist compared to these people today. Guaranteed income, wage and price controls. You really think about this? He's completely progressive compared to where we've been. Completely progressive compared to Bill Clinton.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, much less. And nobody would say this in 1992. You get shot. You'd be hung out to dry. Yeah. Anyway, so this is part of the thing. So I want to begin today with 1900 as a watershed year coming into the 20th century. As we know, the crucial dates here, 1905 is the Russo-Japanese War, the failed Russian Revolution in 1905. Historically we know this. World War I, of course, breaks out 14 till 18. We have after that the new coalition around the Wilson synthesis of the League of Nations, a new kind of tightening of international law. All of these things are going. But publication-wise, it's very important. The Interpretation of Dreams, which basically shocked the world, right, in some ways, Freud's great book, particularly Chapter 7 on representation. Husserl's Logical Investigations, which was a crucial work for Martin Heidegger and for Jacques Derrida. Two people that were tremendous, as well as many professional other people who are not as, quote, part of the, the dominant conversation, but particularly the section on expression and meaning and expression and signs, and the difference between an expressive and an indicative sign. So this was a study of signs and language together by Husserl. Very, very influential, studied very, very seriously by Martin Heidegger and by Jacques Derrida. In fact, Derrida's first major philosophical work was Voice and Phenomena, which is a reading of chapter 6 of this book. And so in the same year, Nietzsche dies, who to me, again, was the person that was thunderstruck of the world to come. The nihilism is that most uncanny guest who knocks at the door, right, etc. And I'm adding another person because this is very important for our purposes, a man named Louis Bachelier, right? A Frenchman, an economist and thinker. He wrote a book called The Theory of Speculation. And the working premise of this book was that there was a discovery of a homology that happened between the price fluctuations on the Bourse, the Paris exchange, and the bond trading, and the diffusion of heat through physical substances. In other words, he uses the Gaussian distribution model right into the study of financial phenomena. He tries to develop this kind of theory. So very early in the game, people that go the way of financial capital, right, or speculative capital in a certain way, have this fundamental text that they're using, right, in order to figure out price movements and price fluctuations. So he makes a distinction between two forms of probability. And just to give you an idea, these people are certainly not stupid, right? Two forms of probability. One, of course, would be the mathematical. And this is a priori. And we've talked a little bit about this. Badiou's mathematical ontology, of course, a priori means that it's happening, it's already always there, right? The mathematical. Mm-hmm. You meet it, right? In a certain way. And this is the scientific approach, quote unquote, to probability. The other is the probability based on future events. And I emphasize future here. Because fictitious capital, what we're looking at in this chapter, is really like a future claim outside of production on earnings to come. And that's a working proposition we should have throughout this, these sessions. Right? So probability, and this is an a priori, this is a priori, so you can see in some ways where some of us in philosophy talk about this is Kantian. Well, this is a Kantian approach. The a posteriori is the future, right? The a priori is already embedded, if you will, or always already there beforehand, right? Right? Then these two notions play out very actively. And again, why philosophy is important, because a lot of these people pick up on, the way philosophy, especially during the Enlightenment, is constructing the mind. That we have these a priori, intuitive moments, right, that, we do not understand until the a posteriori, right? And there are many levels to this a priori. I mean, I'm not going to go into, this is a formal material, right?
It's Louis.
This is Louis Bachelier in his book, The Theory. It's not in English, I'm sorry to say. It's not in English, but it's a classic in terms of what ultimately becomes that markets themselves, equity and bond markets, are based on future events, and therefore it's really a random walk. You're always playing with chance. You're always contingent. There's nothing really ultimately mathematical or scientific about this, which, if you begin to think about this 100 years, 118 years later, the quants, the algorithmic trading systems are all based on the mathematical. They don't have any of this really in mind. They're trying to use this with certainty towards this, but it never really works. Some of the key players here, again, are Ray Diallo, Bridgewater, who has the little room, and then Mercer. Yes, these are the two main players who have used the quant. And the first quant who got name recognition was a woman named Elaine Garazelli. She worked many years ago in the 90s, and she made her name by doing quantitative research. very high level mathematical research on markets in terms of their swings.
What
Just to
about
give you an idea.
LTCM, they had like
That was after
Nobel Prize
Gonzarelli. Yeah,
winning
they did.
quants,
Yes,
and
they did.
they went
That's
belly up.
correct. So I bring this up that maybe in a way, Bachelier, right, in his way, is way ahead of the game in terms of his division between probability and the mathematical, right? And that you're betting on future events. And if you can see in the Hilferding, between the lines, he's always talking about expectations. The expectations of the movement of money capital, bank capital into speculative capital, then back into bank capital. You know, this is part of the movement that he's going through. And how these fictions become created, this fictitious capital, at a high level of abstraction, because it's based on chance and contingency of future events. You know, and you're dealing with a 17th century model here of probability, you know, because the mathematical here, for those of you who've done some philosophy here, you know, vis-a-vis the Heidegger and what we talked about Descartes. Remember, Descartes is looking for certainty, right? It's universal mathesis. He's the mathematician. It's the new model on which everything is ground, the universal mathesis, and the drive is for certainty in the discourse on the method. Right? And he's trying to eliminate this, even though this is the era, the 17th century, which is early mercantile capital. You know, you're in the early phase of manufacturing, but you're really in mercantile to manufacturing capital in the 17th century. Descartes is setting up a mathematical certainty, what he's trying to do. And this is one of the reasons that, you know, the dominance of his model has taken hold. Right, in many ways. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I mean, from the political economy standpoint.
Clarification of
Yeah,
probability,
sure.
probability based on future events. So you have to know what the outcome is, and then you're making a bet based on that.
You don't have to know the outcome.
But you're
betting on the outcome.
What the outcome is.
Remember, you're always it's a throw of the dice.
Okay, I didn't mean to say
Okay.
no, but
Yeah.
this is the outcome. Based on this outcome,
Yes.
this is what we're going to be looking at.
Well, I mean, that's what the risk management people do. I mean, I would put risk management in between these two. They're really always trying to risk assess, risk manage, you know, the management of risk. This management of risk, to me, is part of the security principle. This is what's killing labor. It's killing struggle in certain ways. Everybody's worried about, okay, I might not have a job if I go on strike, or I might not, you know, have this or that, because they've been indoctrinated very much by, you know, this kind of thinking, you know, if you will. Right?
It's like a movement. The top one is like a movement forward, and the bottom one is like a movement backwards. Right? Like a reverse engineering.
Possibly, but this is
Yeah.
all. This is a presupposition of which yields a certainty. This is the drive of capital now, if you will, speculative. Let me clarify. Speculative capital, the drive is to go the way of the mathematical a priori,
Right.
since the emphasis upon quants. You don't really hear about the art of investing anymore. You don't hear about the intuitive, you know, models. You talk about the scientific and mathematical theories of investing. Yeah.
What was your point, that labor now is ensconced in which?
Well,
model?
they're ensconced in this
The
always, but with the outcome in mind that the security
negative.
principle. Yes,
It's always negative.
it's always negative, right?
We're going to lose.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Not only we're going to lose, we might lose our jobs, or we're putting our own future at stake. You know, and therefore we don't go on strike. We don't risk. You know, this becomes, even though it's based on risk, ironically, it becomes risk averse, right? Because the probability is in the insurance actuarial tables. This is all, you know, again, look, this is
It's all
it's
about
very
cutting your
sophisticated.
losses.
Yeah, what's that? I'm sorry? What's
It's
that?
all about cutting your losses.
Yeah, cutting your losses. You know how many times I've heard that phrase in the last week? Yeah, cut your losses. Yeah, it's about cut the losses. Don't take a risk. You see this in all facets of everyday life, in my opinion, right now. This is going to be part of the working premise of techniques of servitude, how people have become, you know, with the book we looked at, willing slaves of capital. You know, and in some ways, in some ways, for those that don't know this, are not in the game, right? They're being completely left behind, and this is a trickle-down effect of how their daily lives become financialized, right? And how the new fear, is administered. I'm trying to draw some, kind of psychological affects out of this as well. What happens.
Yeah, like
So
the second one's like intentional. Like if I wanted to be able to wanted this outcome with this level of risk, then
Well,
I
it's
can
not-
start to
Yeah, go ahead.
engineer backwards.
I mean, they're both intentional because the people that follow this model, which Bachelet thinks is not good for speculation, ultimately, because it really doesn't work.
Right,
But there are
exactly.
many people that are taking this up today because of that drive for certainty, etc. So there are guys that mathematics, listen, at one level, say you're let's put ourselves in the role of a Wall Street analyst for a second, and you're following the semiconductor industry. And you're working with all your models, you're looking at future earnings projections, product development, right? What's going into research and development. All of these things become factors in much more of an expectational analysis, right? Where you're going to try to speculate upon the outcome using partially this model, but at the same time, you're always in this model of probability. You hear what I'm saying? I mean, so you're using certain tools from this, right? Where you can project out that micron technology has X amount of gram and nan, capacity. They have new factories, that are producing this. The demand is such in China at this point, if this makes sense, right?
Makes sense,
So all of this is being factored into an equation, if you will, in terms of what they'll say the company itself is probably going to make $20 billion for the year, right? On the bottom line. And therefore, from there, you begin to get this, pricing that goes on in terms of the asset class called securities, right? How it becomes, the price on the exchanges. So what I'm really trying to do here is give this background because this still plays out today. This really plays out today in a very active way. This is very basic, and what this becomes in Wall Street parlance is the random walk hypothesis. That anytime you play the market, right, or if you play, futures, right, in a sense as investments, you're taking a random walk. You have just as good a chance, outcome, of throwing darts at the 2,500 New York Stock Exchange listed stocks as you do through your rational faculty or through a mathematical certainty.
It's kind of what index funds are based on.
Yes, that's right. Yes, they defined this model many, many times.
What's
So
Bayes' theorem?
What's what? I'm sorry.
Bayes' theorem.
Whose theorem is this?
BAYES. It's probability theory.
Yeah, that's
That
probability.
we have
Yes.
inadequate knowledge to predict probability or something like that. I don't know. Never
Yes,
mind.
yes. Well, I mean, this is why you have, all this asking the questions, right, et cetera, because you want to get closer and closer, so the totality of knowledge would give you a better thing. But this is a very interesting model in the sense that Deleuze once said that the rationality of the markets is irrationality. And that's really the paradox we're always dealing with. The rationality of the stock markets is in its irrationality. Right? So we're really studying here irrational forces. So there was a commodity trader, I remember back in the 70s, made a lot of money. He said Freud's death drive has more to do with investing than anything about the company or something like that. And he made a fortune playing commodities. Still plays chess every day up in the Bay Area. I hear stories. This guy's kind of, yeah. Anyway, so, yeah. So the thing here is that, this whole thing of certainty, right, is being dislodged, right? So this is where the whole risk management comes in. The drive for certainty, though, as I was saying earlier, has limited any kind of possibility, in my opinion, of real labor action, real radical action in a certain way, because, this drive has seeped to every level. I need to be certain I have the bread on the table. I need to be certain about this. People will not take that risk or really try to understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, it also seems like the drive for certainty is affecting like investment decisions in terms of what people you know, there really is kind of a lack, the real economy really isn't expanding, particularly, you know.
Well, it depends on what we mean by the real economy, because these are terms, given what we're doing here, vis-a-vis fictitious capital, that need to be examined. I mean,
Right.
certainly Hilferding in 1914 is still using terms like that. Our question is, because we live in such this level of financialization and such levels of abstraction, how will this ultimately, you know, play out in terms of real economy? Because the real economy is also that, you know, X amount of dollars are going to go to some village in China, right, and create a new project there, right, et cetera, and create jobs and production, and then feed something else, you know. So
Yeah.
you have to think of this way, because really we're so much involved in not thinking through the flows of money, right, and the flows of this very high level of abstraction that's going on. What role does, you know, a company such as Apple Computer have in buying back its stock? What's really going on there? What are they trying to do? You know, and you know why technology is probably a good buy in this environment is because they're like banks. They have all this cash that they've hoarded right now. You're buying safe investments with Microsoft. Cisco systems, the router systems, the software people, Oracle, you know, the other big, you know, yeah, Apple.
But that's what I mean, is
Yeah.
they become so big that
Right.
they just control the system.
Yeah, I mean, sure, yeah. But again, you know, the question is, the certainty is going back into bank capital. It's not especially any
Sure.
more money capital in the exchanges.
Right.
So try to keep separated in your mind the difference between the exchange and money capital versus that of the movement back to bank capital, which then is loaned out as interest, you know, et cetera. Look, the Wall Street I brought again, you know, for a little deconstruction. On the front page of the journal after the latest massacre, right? Era of ultra cheap mortgages ends. Right? This is the headline. So this is going to set off all kinds of bells and whistles as rates hit a 7-year high. Right? So what does this do? Of course, first thing you're going to infer from this, what does this do to the housing market? What does this do to the prices of, you know? Yeah.
Everything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And everything that goes into houses.
And also, what does it do to debt, household debt, right? Because a lot of people, I know people that basically refinance their houses to send kids to colleges, to private schools, which is insanity to me, but I mean, you know, but that's another, you know, story. Yeah. I mean, economic insanity, not real insanity.
Homeless with a degree.
I'm sorry?
Homeless, but with a degree.
Yeah, homeless with a degree. Yeah, I like that. HWD. Okay. Yeah. All right. But anyway, I mean, what I'm really trying to do here, again, this kind of montage where you're seeing how they're thinking, right, in this this Kantian dualism, if you will, between the a priori, you know, of the mathematical intuition, right, and the mathematical sublime, if you will, as a model of certainty, and then the a posteriori, which is ultimately that other part of this where future events are being, you know, kind of calculated through the probability. And as you say, outcome, yes, of course, a probability is going to have an outcome. If I bet Golden State against Houston tonight, I'm betting on the probability that Golden State will win. I'm looking at the odds. The same thing in a horse race or something like that. Yeah.
But I was also thinking about
Yeah.
the difference. I wanted a particular outcome that I can reverse engineer back, right? Say if I wanted gold to be at 4, and I started looking at all the inputs that affected the price of gold, and which of those inputs can I start to control?
Yes.
You can buy it.
Right.
Yes, but that's what the hedge, you know, that's the next
Right,
level.
right.
He's not writing during a time, he's writing in a basic time before the hedge fund or the hedging techniques are only operative in commodities, not so much in stocks at this point. Right? Yeah. See, Joseph Kennedy thought like you. He shorted the market, he bet for it to go down in 1929. That's his first fortune, before he started bringing in Scotch whiskey from
I
Scotland.
knew that, but I forgot it.
What?
I didn't know that.
And then Franklin Roosevelt made the rooster guard the hen house, right?
Yeah.
Basically, he became the first chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission. That was Joseph P. Kennedy. Through that part. Bernard Baruch argued against him and said bears do not live on Fifth Avenue. And a bear, of course, being the model that the dormant bear will just, sit there and let the market go down and, et cetera, and eat the bull, right, so to speak, et cetera. And but Kennedy proved him wrong, as did a lot of other speculators during this time. So anyway, this is one of the earliest models here that gives you the background to the contingency and the chance element here. And remember, you have many poems, especially Mallarmé. Every revolution is a throw of a die, right? Every revolution is based on chance. Nothing will abolish the notion of the hasard. He uses in French. Nothing will abolish chance. So chance is always working here. And this is another thing that people say this is why socialism, if it secures everything, it ultimately eliminates, quote, chance out of the equation, and this becomes very boring to people. Yeah, there's no longer any juice, so to speak. This is one of the arguments against a socialist or a planned economy. It's taking out the factor of chance. But I mean, that's on a very basic, that doesn't really get into levels of exploitation and the victimhood and anything like that. But that has always been an argument against why the socialist, economy, because life itself is based on, the expectation of the future and its contingent nature. And you can't stop that, right? In a sense. And some people have read that. That's a kind of a right-wing, interpretation, if you will, of how chance and a planned economy would collide, so to speak, right? But yeah. So anyway, I mean, I hope you kind of get that. I mean, the a priori is the mathematical. You may even think of this in terms of like Plato and Pythagoras, right? That the mathematical is the priori, but the chance comes in after that. You have to build a republic, in a sense. But still, the drive, justice is mathematical in Plato. It's very interesting when you really think about that. Justice is defined throughout the Republic as the harmony between the tripart division of the soul, the appetitive, the spiritual, and the rational, and that of the social forces. And how do you achieve this harmony between these three parts of the soul, which Badiou relanguages as desire, affect, and thought, in terms of our modern soul. Desire, the psychoanalytic, right? The affect, the psychological, as well as some of the physiological, and then of course thought. Have we begun to think? For him, the thinking again is in the mathematical. That's at the base, the mathematical ontology. So one of the things, I mean, I'm sorry Arto's not here because we've had discussions about this, but anyway, the Badiou ontology, the mathematical ontology, might be read, his work on set theory and all of that, as a way of understanding this new movement and these new levels of abstraction in capital, right? Why he goes beyond the Heideggerian poetic ontology. Although I find the poetic ontology much more interesting.
In What is a Thing, Heidegger breaks down mathematics
Right.
in much broader terms than the way we think about mathematical.
Right.
It's really about what can be taught. It's
Right.
almost this kind of pedagogy
Right.
thing
Right.
that he does, which I found actually really nice.
Yeah, well, he's a great teacher. I mean, sometimes these Nazis can be very nice.
But it put a whole new spin on what mathematics was, essentially, in much broader terms.
Yes,
than I think we
yes,
think about it now.
that's correct.
And it's also about, I mean, it's the same idea. It's about projecting something before you actually experience
Right.
it, which is also.
That's a good point.
Oh,
And again,
that's really interesting.
I emphasize the fact that this is one of the reasons the study of philosophy is not in the curriculum. Because if you have the background in this Kantian, because Kant begins in mathematics too, with the a priori and the a posteriori, if you have people trained in this, they begin to see in a very different level, right? Early on, that this is the reason that philosophy is being, completely censored more and more and more, without any kind of, the house that Kant built, so to speak. Whereas this is what we're looking at. We're not looking at Hegelian spirals at this point. We can talk about that a little later when we get to Soros and others, and Silicon Valley and the Heideggerian temptation. But yeah, anyway, and these are all very intuitive, raw concepts and raw thoughts in my head. Yeah.
I just didn't hear the Husserl book you mentioned in the beginning is so influential.
Tremendously.
Which was the title of it?
Logical Investigations.
Okay.
It's here.
Okay.
Yeah. And especially chapter 6, which I recommend reading. And then you can read after that, after chapter 6, Logical Investigations, the sections we read in Being and Time on discourse, in the early parts of on Being and Time. And then you can read Derrida, Voice and Phenomena, translated, unfortunately, as speech and phenomena rather than voice. Yeah, so going back to Chris Marquer and these problems in translation. Okay. So anyway, so it's a very interesting, advent of the 20th century here, in which this stuff starts to play out right along Wall Street. Now, so this, and last week I think everybody was here except Bob, right? I went through some of the theories that came out of this Bachelier, on portfolio allocation, portfolio management, Markovits, all the way up to the other people during this period. Certainly, who else did we do? Bill Sharp, Mogliani, and Fama, and then the Black-Scholes models, of which still I think we're under the influence of. And then you have the Renaissance technology, the Mercer people, Diallo, the new kids on the block, and anyway, these are the models of the modern strategies. But this is where it starts, right? And at the same time, Charles Dow, who was able to mathematically, and this is where the Dow Jones Industrial Averages in the United States, there's a man named Charles Dow, who is again, an economist and player of the market, and he comes up with the Dow theory, of which today the 30 stocks compose the Dow Industrials average. There's a Dow Transportation average, and there's a Dow Industrial averages, and I can show you this in the market data system, the market data section of the thing. So you have the Dow Jones Industrial, S&P, and NASDAQ, but then you have Dow Jones's Industrial, Transportation, Utility, Total Stock Market, and then the Barron's 400. And these are indexes that are used to show general trends. And he figured out certain patterns that you'd be able to read when to buy and when to sell. So a lot of people still adhere to this Dow theory in terms of trading techniques. Not that it's foolproof for certain. If it was, everybody would be following and be multi-millionaires or billionaires, right? Anyway, so anyway, but he's also important during the same time. He's working in America, but it's really Bachelier's thing because it's connected to, quote, combustion and heat. He's trying to thermodynamic models. Yes, exactly.
Thermodynamics.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's very interesting how science plays a role, right, in all of this. When it comes to the application, right, to financialization and to finance capital and to, markets, equities, the equity markets, commodity markets, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see these are the charts. When they do it in color, this is based on Dow theory. How is something being filled in? What are the trends? And this, of course, is here, the futural events. But if you can read this, this is called the technical approach. And I'll go through this more on another day. But there are two basic schools of thought. The fundamental, what does the company do? How much money is it going to earn? What are its future prospects? Versus the technical price relation, right? The technical person reads charts, reads trends all the time. And then you can fill in the blank. The trick is to be able to read something like this fundamentally. Why is this doing this? What's the news underneath this? What is the narrative? What is the story? And then how is it being received? That's really the trick in reading these kind of graphs, right? you know, and there are all kinds of different kind of graphs, and we'll go through this. I mean, that'll be part of the more practical stuff, right? Yeah, but you can see this page itself, you know, you could write, you know, 200 pages just on, you know, the statistics here by, you know, I mean, you know, the fundamentals of the statistics here. This is all based on, you know, probability and in terms of 10, 15 years earlier of the revolutionary legacy. You know, you begin to see this, you know, taking place. All this is going on historically. And then, of course, like I said, Nietzsche's death is a watershed to me because it kind of marks, you know, the future. It is beyond good and evil. There's no longer a kind of value system that we can hold on to anymore. He throws into question the whole question of value, such as Marx does too. Marx is asking the question, really fundamentally Marx's philosophical question to me is, what does value really mean? You know, and how to go about that in a completely different way. That's the fundamental philosophical question. Being is value in Marx. You know, and to get outside of the labor theory of value only, that's what we're trying to do here. We're looking also at levels of abstraction that may redefine what value is. Or can we really ultimately pinpoint what the value of a thing is? You know, and we're seeing some books out recently. I forgot the name. What's his name? The Value of Everything is a new book. It just came out that Martin Wolf reviewed in the Financial Times. The value of all things, or something like that. So you know, this becomes a new moment, right? And you know, so anyway, this is the question of how do you value ultimately probably the future events, you know, through theories of probability. What are you using to project? Because this is based on projection, right? Always. This is projection, right? Whereas this is much more the inside, yeah.
Should it be probability of future events instead of based on future events? I think
Both.
Based?
Both.
Then you would have to
Both.
know what you want the future event to be then.
Yes, of course.
Okay, that's
Yeah, that's why I
that's
put
what
that
I'm
there.
trying
I'm
to
sorry,
get-
I'm
that's what
sort
I'm
of
trying
conscious of the language I use.
That's what I'm trying to get
Not
to
all the
before.
time.
I was trying to get to before. Make
Yeah,
the
I got
distinction.
you.
Yeah.
The
Yeah,
distinction.
okay, yeah.
It's not only of, you know, that could be
Yeah.
put in there,
Yeah.
but it's of and on, right?
Okay.
So good point.
Yeah.
But I think the on is important.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
I was getting stuck on the on.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, no, good. Yeah, excellent. Yeah. Okay, so do we have a wipe or no? Can I get a, yeah, sorry. Yeah, I forgot to ask, yeah.
And when was Hilferding's book? Or
Well, I'm gonna do that next,
Okay.
okay?
What date?
1910.
14. Oh, I thought you said 14.
No, that's Lenin. Lenin started 1916. 14 was the First World War. Yeah. So you go 1902 is the first book on imperialism by Hobson, by the Englishman, J.G. Hobson. Very good look at imperialism in terms of colonialism and the extraction of natural resources. It's a fundamental book. And 1902 he writes that. Then we have the Hilferding, Finance Capital. And then Lenin in 1916, I think it's published 1917, writes Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. Yes. In 1914, rightfully so, Karl Kautsky's book on the ultra-imperialism. And he sees imperialism as a capitalist coalition, the coalition of the willing, so to speak, and the Bush administration. Yeah, I mean, this language has stayed with us for a very long time. This is the great thing about history. If you have this historical sense, you're you're a much deeper reader of the current situation. It's not so confusing in some ways, as many people, think of it. So, yes. So, yes, this is going on at, this is the thing? Is this it? Or?
No,
That's the
on
napkin.
the map.
Oh, okay. Oh, I got it. Okay. All right. So good. Okay. So. Yeah, it's a napkin. I'm sorry. I did this because, you have the psychoanalytic advance, you have an advance in linguistics, you have an advance in terms of theories of what speculative capital is about. All this is going on simultaneously as we enter the 20th century. And we begin to see the inter-imperialist wars, right? We begin to see England owns the world and Germany wants it.
Right.
And we see that repeated twice
Yeah.
in 45 years.
But are we gonna see the US owns the world and China wants it?
Well, I think the coalition is a little different this time. you
No, I
think,
know,
yeah.
I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not
I
drawing-
mean, I hear you, yeah.
I'm not drawing a straight line.
No, I
I'm just
understand. I know.
Posing the
But,
question.
I mean, I think it's important, though. Yes, you're right. I mean, and you know, Russia's going to want a piece too. You know,
course.
obviously, and yeah.
Aside from the United States.
So anyway, yes, going back, it's 1902 is the first theoretical book on imperialism. 1910 is Hilferding's Finance Capital. By the way, he was the finance minister in Germany under Gustav Stresemann during Weimar, later stages of Weimar. He was tortured to death by the Gestapo. They claim it was suicide, but they killed him.
Hilferding?
Yeah,
No.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. 1943, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah. So he writes Finance Capital, the Austrian school of left Austrian, Marxist. He was a member of the Social Democratic Party, very close to a man named Max Adler, who's also known for methodological research. And so Finance Capital is written in 1910. 1914, Kautsky, is writing on ultra imperialism, the coalition moment of what imperialism is, and in 1916, published in 17, Lenin's Imperialism, Highest Stage of Capitalism. Now, I'm going a little bit ahead, but I just wanted to make you aware, part of Hard Negre's emphasis in Empire is to argue against Lenin's imperialism, that it's no longer a term that is adequate for our times. It's really about empire. So when someone says about China, as Phil did, to Hard Negre, that doesn't matter. It's global.
Yeah.
It's a global empire at this point. It doesn't matter. Whereas back here, it was still about coalition of capitals, competing capitals, etc. Whereas here, he understands this
National
as a
capitals.
state and national capitals. Right, exactly. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. So he's situated in here, and as you know now, 10 years into the theory of speculation from Bachelet. But anyway, in the United States, if you follow Mandel, this is a long recession, a 25-year recession, a long tendency in the United States. 1873 to 1898 is a long period of recession, according to Mandel's, and you know who Ernst Mandel is to everybody, or some people do. Yeah? Ernst Mandel was, again, a fourth internationalist, a major economist. Most of Fred Jameson's work in economy, political economy, comes out of Ernst Mandel. Introduction to Marxist Economic Thought. The Second Slump is one of his better books, which he wrote after 73, after the Bretton Woods. So yeah, Ernst Mandel is his name. I heard him at the Brecht Forum.
Yeah, me too.
Met him at and he came out, he was on a panel with Anwar Sheikh, and he goes, imagine 600 million Chinese workers descending on this planet. He's going on about the future of the proletariat. He's very, very, very. The only person that I know a couple of people, but anyway, one of the only people I know that they went to his house to do his thesis, meeting, his approval of his dissertation. They went to his house. Belgium born, worked out of Belgium for a long time. Anyway, interesting to read if you're interested in Marxian economic theory. He also wrote a very, very good book on the crime novel. Very, very good little book, a little presses on Raymond Chandler and company. Yeah. So anyway, but this was a slump. So in some ways, Hilferding's beginning to see, very early on, who's someone very much in terms of the labor movements, he's beginning to see what, is coming down. And he's one of the first, if not the first, to systematically try to understand financialization and the move from just industrial capital, and industrial capitalism. He's really the first, to my knowledge, who does so very actively theoretically. Other people are certainly intuitive and speaking to it, but it becomes a new thing, right? So anyway, begins here with that capital is not the final station. Finance capital is not a final stage, right? But it is a condition, right, that precedes the advent of organized
Who are
capitalism.
you reading?
This is from Hilferding, that he thinks that finance capital is not the final stage of capital. That's why Chocolas, for example, Beth, uses a term like the penultimate stage, the next to final stage, right? And the emergence of organized capitalism, right? It precedes, now we're probably living, after all this financialization, in a new form of the organization of capitalism. Yeah, new forms of organizing, everything politically as well as economically, right? So what you're getting now is the movement of a rhetoric of protectionism, but always an export of capital as well. You need that simultaneously to go on. So no longer, anybody who takes Trump's tweets seriously is out of their mind, because, he's being briefed every day. You really can't do that, Donald. You can't do that, Donald, because this is, something that will kill the system. You should know that as a business. I can imagine how they talk to him,
Now
These
gone.
people do. Yeah.
Someone grab his phone.
Right.
Here's some pornography, go to your room.
So, Maleka's in the hospital, she won't see a thing. Melania, whatever it is. Right? So, again, this movement of these books lead to, contemporary stuff such as, and you probably know some of these names, obviously to dependency theory, world systems theory of Wallerstein, picks up on this, and, where the discussion of the core, the periphery, the semi-periphery, and, the periphery countries are playing out in world systems with Manny Wallerstein. Right?
Barron and Sweezy, do they explain?
Yeah, Barron and Sweezy are actually part of this with the great book Monopoly Capitalism, right, which is the monthly review crowd. You brought up Science and Society earlier. They had some relationship to Science and Society, but monthly review was really theirs. Paul Baran and Paul Sweezy, and who's John Bellamy Foster is now kind of in there as one of the heirs of the journal, and then dependency theory, where dependency theory is Andre Gunther Frank. You probably heard that name, right? No, okay. Major figure, memory. The theory of underdevelopment is his work in dependency theory. It's related to a man named Andre Gunther Frank.
What's his relation with
Saudi Amin?
Well, Samir Amin, but also doesn't he have some relationship with
Wallerstein? Yes, they're
Yeah.
both Mexican. No, I'm just kidding. They both work out of Mexico. Anyway, yes. He takes up a lot of the core periphery
Right.
analysis of world systems and then broadens it into to dependency theory. Yeah. In dependency theory, the fundamental premise is that the South-North, right? That you need the resources of the South, that the extraction is going on. So this is a mutual dependency thing. It's not just outright exploitation, but the dependency is for the extraction of natural resources.
Based on uneven development.
Uneven development. Yes,
Right.
absolutely. Yeah, this is where the underdevelopment comes from. Yeah, exactly. So Amin, is the other one, core periphery, major thinker, Egyptian, I think he's teaching in Senegal, in Dakar.
Yeah.
Now he's maybe 80, 82, 83, you know, very, very
He's
nice.
coming out with a new
Nice.
book for the
He is?
bicentennial
Oh,
of
good.
Marx's birthday.
Oh, excellent, I'm
Yeah.
glad.
He show up in
I
New
read
York.
it something.
Yeah, they should have gotten him as a plenary speaker, that would have been a nice testament
Oh, yeah.
at the left for him. I threw it out, but anyway. I throw out something every year, you know.
Nobody listens to you.
Yeah, no, I know, yeah.
He's still going strong.
Yeah, he's going strong, yeah, he's
Yeah.
good. So these are the people that kind of emerge out of this, you know, trajectory, these debates, and I forgot to mention accumulation of capital, of course, by Luxemburg. Even though Luxemburg is not one that sees fictitious capital or financialization as a major thing. She's more about production and industrial capital and how capital primitive accumulation is going on. You know, so in some ways she's worth reading from that standpoint, but I don't think she's as quote postmodern, and I use that loosely, as the people such as, you know, that we're, you know, looking at here, you know, could lead us to, you know, could lead us to the question of the derivative, you know, to these kind of moments. Right. So anyway, this is a kind of, you know, background map, and I'll put Luxemburg. I forgot the year that the accumulation of capital was published, but it's part of the same force field. Well, just let's look at this as constellations, right, of texts. So you have this too. I think it's late 1919 or whatever. Yeah, I don't know, maybe a little earlier. And you know, this debate between Lenin and Rosenberg is in the Lukács' History and Class Consciousness, if you're interested, the debate on imperialism and on spontaneity and revolutionary vanguard. It's a very interesting debate that they call reform or revolution. In some ways, was a part of the moment. Okay, so this is the kind of background to this for finance capital. So Hilferding comes in. He's obviously reading chapters 25, where Marx, as you obviously picked up, is reading every little document he can get his hands on. Right, in chapter 25, he's mentioning Tuck and other people. He's trying to, you know, frame up how does fictitious capital emerge, right? Where does it come from? How does money capital, you know, or how does the circuit of M prime really emerge, and how does that go back, if you will, into, you know, industrial capital, right? How does it go back into the productive sphere, right? So, you know, how does Volkswagen be able to build new plants, right? Create new jobs, produce new cars.
It's kind of amazing how, like in 1840, all this stuff is going on. You know,
Yeah.
Pretty
you know,
amazing as
the-
well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was blown away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the quantities of money that he talked about.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
also surprised
Yeah.
by that.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
the robber barons, huh?
Hey, they came from somewhere.
Mr. Jay Gould. Let's go steal from Mr. Jay Gould today, yeah. Right? Billy the Kid, right? Yeah. Pat Garrett, who worked for the Vanderbilts. Right?
Garrett went for the man.
Yes, he did. Yeah, we had to get rid of Billy the Kid, hitting too many trains. Billy, they don't like you being so free. Right? Sleep with one eye. Should have slept with two. I sleep with two eyes open. These days. Anyway, but you know, yeah, think about this too. I mean, think about, you know, the outlaw in the 19th century next to, you know, these beginnings of these, you know, and why we're, you know, have this kind of psychic, you know, identification with the Billy the Kid, the James brothers, Posse, you know, the black soldiers that became train robbers. Why the train robber, in some ways, was the, you know, the really figure of the 19th century, right? In many ways, yeah.
Reminds me of how Chocolat makes the pirate the figure now.
Yes, the pirate is going
It's
on.
interesting.
Yeah, it's because he lives by the Greeks, you know, there are nothing but pirates. I can name the families. Yeah, all throughout the islands. They
It's
buy
a
islands.
different analogy, very different.
Yes, you know, well, the pirate class is, you know, listen, there's a very, very good book called Pirate Utopia by Robert, oh God, what's Hakeem Bey? Why am I blocking on his real name? What's his real name? Anyway, it's yeah. I mean, it may be published under Hakeem Bey. It's called Pirate Utopia. It's a seeming text. Robert, oh God, what's his last name? I think it's Wilson. I'm not. Yeah. I'll remember in a second. Yeah. I think it's because he's been sick and I'm blocking on. Yeah. Anyway, he wrote also, Ontological Anarchy. Any of those books? Temporary Autonomous Zone.
Yeah.
Taz. Yeah. This kind of stuff. Hakeem Bey, that's his pseudonym. Yeah. Robert Lamborn Wilson. Yeah. Okay. Peter Lamborn Wilson. Pirate Utopia. Going back to the pirate, Hegel considers the pirate the first proletariat. And interestingly enough, yeah, he does. He writes about this, in his time. And if you really think about this, the pirate class. You think of Jean Lafitte, a fascination of mine being from New Orleans and growing up, where you had the Lafitte's blacksmith shop. And then you had Lafitte's in exile. All this was going on in the French Quarter because Lafitte kept trading posts, and he actually was very good. He freed a lot of slaves, and he worked very actively for free people of color during this period. But he also controlled an area, the swamps, outside of New Orleans called Barataria, which in Creole language literally means the bargain land. You could get great goods from the pirates in this area. So the swamp area where he operated out of was called Barataria, right? Yeah. Well, before Canal, my grandfather worked Canal Street. Anyway, I know the pirate class. They set up shop right at the river, right, like good creeks. But anyway, so Lafitte. The interesting thing about Lafitte, there are many interesting things. Firstly, that he controlled the bayous. So during the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson needed to stop British ships from coming into New Orleans during the Battle of New Orleans and the Battle for Chalmette. This was where the real battle, that's what Jackson Square is about in New Orleans, that history. That's why George Bush went to Jackson Square to say everything's under control after Katrina. This has a symbolic level to it, So anyway, so Lafitte was absolutely instrumental because he could stop the British ships from bringing arms in. Yeah, and this was one of the reasons for the victory in 1812. John Lafitte in some ways is responsible for the United States defense of New Orleans, or the Louisiana Purchase, if you will. Secondly of all, after this, one of Lafitte's ships sinks a ship on which the governor, Claiborne is the name, it's a big street name for this, Claiborne's daughter is on. So Lafitte is deported a few years later, completely out. Where does he end up? Manchester, England. Meets Frederick Engels.
I was.
Yeah, it's a great story. Yeah, and Varillo, I think I've talked a little bit about this. Paul Varillo, the French philosopher, has done some research. He thinks that Lafitte, I haven't seen the documents, but he thinks that Lafitte was one of the major financiers of the early manifesto of the Communist Party. So you have this relationship of pirates from the Jewish pirates, on top of everything else, the Lafitte brothers, from New Orleans, because you have the other Jews, the Lazare brothers, in finance capital, right? And you have the pirates and the finance capitalists side by side. And I know a lot about New Orleans history. The Jewish New Orleans Jews were very active in terms of the commodity exchanges. The Stern family, of which the Stern Foundation comes out of it. This was Edgar B. Stern. The Kohlmeyer family. All of these were very prominent families there. I think I mentioned to you the Lehman family came as fruit merchants that came to New York and founded. The Lazare brothers came to New York too, but they started in New Orleans. So it's a very interesting trajectory where you have King Cotton working on the one hand, these commodity exchanges. The cotton exchange is you can still see the building, right? You have at the same time, the slave exchanges, the market exchanges. You have Lafitte fighting against that, and Lafitte was actually very fond of Napoleon, and he built a house for Napoleon to come to, and it's got a famous bar if you're there called Napoleon House. So anyway, this is a very interesting digression about these interlinkages between the pirates, and this early formation of finance capital, as well as someone that went the other way as a pirate, right? Understood maybe the pirate as proletarian, as Hegel did. I'm not sure he read Hegel or said, wanted to give money to Frederick Engels since he wrote the book. Right. So anyway, it's an interesting sidelight on the notion of a pirate. I think when Choukalas is using pirates, he's really talking about the Greek ship owners who know no laws, control the seas. I'll tell you a little personal story too. 1968, I was in New York, and my family had friends that were in the quote shipping business here. So I go to the office of what we call the Fafayos brothers. They had about 100 ships. Middle tier. But very very rich, etc. I go in the office, and Nick Hygis is a friend of the guy who takes care of the New York operations. This was on the west side in the 40s, in the old Greek, Jewish, Irish configuration, a lot of working class there, but the ship owners also had some of their offices there, etc. I go in, maps of the world. It's during the period, I think it was 67, during the 6-Day War. And I'm looking at where the ships are, and they're all around the Cape of Good Horn, because they're mapping out where all the ships are. And I said, I guess the war, you don't want to go through there. He looks at me, it's very profitable to us. Insinuating that these people help start wars, right, in order to get better routes and trading routes, etc., from themselves. So kind of very interesting, this whole pirate class, because this is, people think Onassis was just shrewd. They had a lot of other, things going on during that period where, there are a lot of bodies out there, Or someone said to me the other night, a friend will help you move, but a good friend will help you move the bodies.
It's interesting. I was just reading an article about how the Emirates are taking over this island at the mouth of the Red Sea.
Yes, absolutely.
And
Yeah,
it's like they're allowing the Saudis to, to bomb the hell out of Yemen and do all this other stuff, but they're getting the island, which controls the Red Sea.
Absolutely. If you think about this, Goebbels had only one part of the equation right. Those who control the streets control the state. Those who control the water and the seas control the state as well, the international trade. And this is, I think, what he's really talking about in this pirate class in some ways, that this is really still what it's about. Despite all this air transport we have, you have to remember. And you've seen the movie Gomorrah. Have you seen the movie Napoli by the Saviano, Roberto Saviano's book, expose of the Camorra, the mafia of Naples. Yeah, pretty amazing, right? You talk about shipping and containerized shipping and what's going on in the docks, et cetera, et cetera. This is a very interesting thing to me too, and one of the reasons I think that the 19th century, since we're talking about the Advent, you have to always bring Melville into the equation too, who I think understood this stuff as well as Marx. He didn't theorize it, but he wrote about it in such a way that was, he understood this extremely, extremely well, including colonialism and the fantasies of colonialism in early works such as T.P., Marty, all these novels of Asia, of the Philippines, and where did Brando go? What was his island? Tahiti. Yeah, Tahiti and all these places. Yeah. I read Nietzsche every day. He got fat though. Beyond good and evil, there's more food. Yeah. So anyway, okay. So
Orson Welles went that way too.
Yes, he did. Yeah, he was drinking 2 bottles of red a day too. On top of the food. Yeah. Who knows what Brando was doing? I think Apocalypse Now ruined him finally. explain that part. Mr. Kurtz, right? And it became Superman and some stupid movie about a heist in Montreal. Anyway. All right, so you want to go to the text? Why don't we go to the text for a while? I want to, again, point out that on page 597, just going back to Marx, is a very crucial sentence and something that we'll go back to. This is in the section, chapter 29. The formation of fictitious capital is known as capitalization. Okay, this is very, you want to know this term, capitalization, right? Any regular periodic income can be capitalized by reckoning it up on the basis of the average rate of interest as the sum that a capital lent out at this interest rate would yield. So it gives the example of this, and then
597.
Yeah, 597. Yeah, it's the first paragraph there. This notion of capitalization, right? Yeah. And then if you look down again on the next page, I'm just trying to highlight a couple of things for Marx, and we'll go back to this next time too. On page 599, he talks about the claims of surplus value. All these securities represent nothing but accumulated claims. This is important. The fourth paragraph down, little short paragraph 599, right? Legal titles to future production, going back to this model here that Bachelier talks about in the theory of speculation. Their money or capital value either does not represent, and this is interesting, capital at all, as in the case of national debts, or is determined independently of the real capital value they represent. I think this is a crucial sentence to go back to on the whole notion of capital as fictitious, right?
It's basically what the whole .com or internet, all these unicorns are basically based on.
Right,
There's nothing
that's
there.
true. The startup, the proverbial startup.
There's nothing there,
Yeah, who's
absolutely
going to
nothing
fund
there.
it? Right,
It's just
right,
speculation.
exactly. So this is interesting. In countries, all countries of capitalist production, just to continue with Marx for a second, there's a tremendous amount of so-called interest-bearing capital or moneyed capital, right? Anything that's interest-bearing for Marx is called moneyed capital in this form. And an accumulation of money capital means, for the most part, right, nothing more than an accumulation of these claims to production, right, and an accumulation of the market price of these claims of their illusory capital value. Again, price is not value, right? Keep that in mind. That's always one of the great insights of Marx vis-a-vis our everyday life. You go into the store and you pay X amount of dollars for this beautiful curated fruit. That is just a price. It is not value for Marx, right? Never, right? No? Okay? So, this is very, very important section here, let me just mention a couple of other things too. Maybe even earlier, he talks about what banking capital has in two forms, and of course this changed. This is on the first page, 594. Banking capital consists of one, cash, in the form of gold or notes, and number two, securities. The latter can be divided into two parts: commercial paper, current bills of exchange that fall due on specified dates, their discounting being the specific business of the banker, and public securities such as government bonds, treasury bills, and stocks of all kinds. In short, interest-bearing paper, which is essentially different from the bills of exchange. Mortgages, too, can be included in this category. So it's as if Blythe Sanders and these people that started to write out printed default swaps and some of these collateralized debt obligations of the mortgage industry read their capital. Mm-hmm. Not that they read it, but somehow, he's writing this in the 1870s.
Yeah.
Yes, Beth.
What
yeah.
does, in his language, what does discounting mean? What does that refer to? It's not something that's intuitive.
It's
to
a
me.
rate that's paid by the state that's less than what you get from the bank. It's like when the feds use the language of discount rate, right? So you're a bank, let's say you're the bank of your Chase. your JP Morgan Chase, and you need money. So you go to the Fed, right? You have what's called an interest rate, right, that you're going to loan out to customers. And let's say you have a ranking system that Rachel Scott is A, you're A minus, Josh is B plus, or something like that. That usually determines your, quote, credit worthiness, or what you're going to pay for the money, what the money costs you to get. And this is an interest rate, of which that interest obviously goes back to the bank. Sometimes the interest is front-loaded, where you'll pay more the first year. Say you get a 5-year loan, it's going to pay more right away, right? And most of these mortgage loans were backloaded with a balloon, as you know, where you get, and a balloon means it would, expand and like the air and then pop, because, all of a sudden you're paying 12%, interest instead of the 1 or 2 you thought you were getting at the beginning. Now the discount rate is what the government, the Fed, and let's call the Fed at this point the fourth branch of government. I'm beginning to think this. I mean, I know you were making fun of me with Grider, the book.
No,
on
I
the
was
Fed.
just surprised.
Yeah, surprised. Okay, anyway, that the Fed has become an institution, very much like what Mills used to call the executive, the military, right, and of course the political directorate. The Fed has become very, very powerful, and more powerful since 1971. More and more, going into the Volcker shock, and we'll go over these things too in terms of recent history. But the discount rate is what the Fed loans money out to the banks.
So it's like a T-bill versus,
Well,
what
yes,
you-
I mean governments are basically funding. The United States. To talk about the United States and the national debt is a joke, because the United States has always been a debtor nation. It's always issuing paper, right? But it's backed, right? Supposedly, fundamentally, by safety. 51 cents on the dollar of your tax money goes to the military to keep us protected from shootings in Texas. And other places.
As long as there's no competition for the dollar.
Yes, that's right. That's
As long
correct.
as the dollar is.
Well, that's why we
Debt
eliminate
is
people like
denominated in
Saddam
dollars.
Hussein and Gaddafi
Or
and
threatening.
others, and why we constantly will do this, and we'll start so-called vocal trade wars with China.
Right.
In some way, we don't want the renminbi, we don't want the Chinese currency to get too high, in some ways. Yeah.
Although you see,
We don't want oil traded in these things. It's no accident to my mind, I'm not going to write a treatise on this, but I don't think it's an accident that oil now is over $80 or near $80, and now people are talking about 100. And if you remember, the last Wall Street Journal 2 weeks ago was about oil, and now it's in the daily news every day. Yeah. It's no accident that this is happening at this moment. China is not an oil producing. They have oil, but they're not oil producing. And you have to remember, there's been a major domestic policy here in the United States. Strategic petroleum reserves, and also, very well about the whole fracking and what's happening in the Midwest.
you fly over North Dakota at night, and it's lit up like a city.
Yes, that's right.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
It used to
yeah.
be like when
It's
I
all
go to.
flared. It's all flared gas.
Wow.
I have relatives in
Yeah.
Beaumont, Texas, and they set me up with this radical from Berkeley. I'm very young, right? Anyway, I go over to, she wants to go to Spindletop and get stoned to watch the oil rigs and all this at work. This was the level of the desire in Beaumont, Texas, right? But this is what they do, right? About the oil, refineries and stuff like that, which was a major oil find back in the day. Yeah, Spindletop, it's called, outside of Houston. Yeah, I mean, it's no accident that Texas became Texas. That's another thing. You used to cross the line from Louisiana. If you don't have an oil well, get one. That was the billboard when you cross into Texas. And a rig like this. Yeah. If you don't have an oil one. So yeah, it's not an accident. But to go back, so the discount rate is what's loaned. So how they pulled this off, as you know, I mean, in a very basic sense, and we can go over this more actively when we get more to the modern position, is that the Fed lowered the discount rate to basically zero. And of course, who pays for this? We do, in terms of our taxes, right? etc. And also the creation of more money. More money is being put into circulation. And this was the way, so they loan it out at 0 or a half of 1%. So the prime customers would get 3 to 4%. So you give me $1 billion to play with, and I know I can go to the Fed window and say, give me my half of 1% of the $3 billion, and I can go out and make 5 times on my money. I'm certainly going to stay in my job as Jamie Dimon, as chairman of the board.
I heard an
etc.
interview with Nomi Prinz yesterday, and her estimate is 27 trillion of conjured money by the Fed.
Conjured.
Globally.
And conjured means
Conjured meaning just
printed from the treasury.
helicopter dumped
Yeah.
on the banks.
Yeah, the store.
27 trillion.
Stored money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fictitious
Yeah,
money.
fictitious money, yeah, but it's money. See,
Yeah.
that's the thing, it goes into circulation. It doesn't necessarily become bills of exchange, but it goes into the, into the money supply. It goes into money in circulation. And this is another element, if you will, of why we have to emphasize circulation, which is a very under-theorized aspect in finance capital.
Well, they do.
Yeah, very under-theorized. Yeah, go ahead. I'm
But
sorry.
aren't they
The
doing
sphere.
that to try to generate more, to try to generate bills of exchange?
Yes, ultimately,
Yeah.
yes, ultimately,
Yeah.
yes. But in the meantime, no, it's to put it into the supply, to
Right.
know it's there, that
Right.
it's out there.
Right.
They keep pumping it in.
We need liquidity.
They make decisions, yes, they make decisions about the liquidity, yes.
Yeah.
No, this is, listen,
But
I'm
they're
I'm
not
sorry
giving it
about
to
the language,
us.
but it's a lubricant to the system
They're
always.
just giving
They're
it to
just
the
moving
banks so they
system.
can buy their
Yeah.
stock.
Right, I'm sorry?
They're not giving it to ordinary people, they're giving it to the bankers so they can buy back their
Yes,
stock.
of course,
Yeah.
of course.
Well,
No, this
say,
is
say more
the-
about
yeah.
that process, what that looks like.
Which
How they
you-
pump it into the banks, how do they do it?
Well, they make decisions. They have what's called Federal Reserve decisions. They have meetings in which they determine minutes, right? They say we may need a little more money in supply this week, and they'll the Treasury will begin to pump, or print more money, and that goes into the sphere of circulation. It goes into the banks. They'll start feeding. Listen, we know you have this on your books right now. Well, we're going to give you an extra $1 billion, right? That you'll be able to loan out. It makes money easy, etc. No accident again why this mortgage rate thing is on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, because this is the question about Wall Street now. Will tight money hurt the the security prices? And what stocks will it benefit? And as I was mentioning earlier, Apple is not really only a manufacturer of the Mac. It's a bank. It's ultimately a hoarding of capital over these years. Microsoft, the same thing. Oracle, the same thing. Cisco Systems, many of these technology firms, and the FANG economy. This is what Facebook's got. They've got a lot of cash on hand. So these are the kind of victors in this kind of a scenario, in some ways. Not that you just go out and buy it tomorrow. That requires more technical knowledge of reading the stat papers and all this kind of stuff. But anyway, to go back to this, yes, the Fed makes policy, right? And the Fed policy is always, at least on the euphemistic level, is to try to control inflation. And they think if you put too much money in the system at a certain time, right, it's going to create an inflationary situation. But how do they mark what the inflation's about? Well, they look at unemployment statistics. They look at durable goods. They look at all these kind of economic statistics, and they make their decisions
Wages.
based on this, and wages, of course. Right. It's because, again, what is America but no longer a producer nation? It's a consumptive nation. Right? That's what we do. We consume. We don't really produce anything. I mean, we're down. I think after World War II, we were 25 to 26% of the manufacturing sector of the world. I think that's down to 9 to 10% today. So you're talking about quite a significant decline, almost 60%, in terms of the production. And think about this too. When people come back from World War II, their jobs, right, in factories. This is one of the strengths of the Union. If you read a book like New Men of Power, Mills, this is a great book. This is a book you should study at the BSc. About why the unions could not take control, because they did have power after World War II. They had the manufacturing sector under control. They had membership. They had the force, etc. But You had people like Ruther, Meany, others who basically compromised completely with the system. Right? And this was the beginning, in my opinion, of the defeat of labor. Even though someone like Stanley would say Taft-Hartley and the earlier NLRB formation. I mean, I agree with that, at least theoretically. But the real thing was after World War II, this was the great center of manufacturing. Boeing, how many black people that were in the Army got jobs at Boeing on the West Coast? Right? Devil in the Blue Dress. That's the story of that in some ways. The Walter Mosley Jr. novel made into a film with Denzel Washington. This is very, very active during this period. So anyway, the Fed does not really have an active role in things. This is created, again, by the rooster guarding the hen house. Who's the first Fed people who creates the Fed? J.P. Morgan. It's the banking system creating the system in a certain way. So this serves as the central bank.
Because of speculation on the copper market.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Yes, exactly.
They were
There was
buying
a copper-
copper in order to drive down the price.
Exactly.
And J.P. Grant
Yes.
rode in to the rescue.
He did. Let's create a new bank. And as Brecht once said, it's a more criminal to found a bank than it is to rob one. So that's what we should be, founders of banks. Another thing the left never figured out. Of course you need a bank. Just think, during these periods, how many people, recruits or, a cadre formation you could get if you had banking at decent loan rates, I mean, Amalgamated is a complete failure as a labor bank, right? I know you're rolling your eyes. Yeah. I went in there and said, how come I'm only getting 1%? I can get 2% on my CD.
Amalgamated is like the Soviet Union,
There you go. Yeah. So anyway, I mean, again, we'll go back to this in a more detailed way. But Chris, in a sense, this begins to dictate policy. This is what everybody's looking at. This is there are two major indicators, at least in my mind. What the Fed's policy is going to be, what's the cost of money, and the other main index in all of this is the Consumer Confidence Index. Right? Does the consumer have confidence in the economy to continue to buy? Yeah. And these are statistics that come out on a monthly basis. Right? The CPI, it's called. CCI. Yeah, and then they have the price index. All this is measured, again, going back to the mathematics and the statistics. Again, it's the level of the interpretation of these statistics that really counts.
Yeah, that comes out of Michigan, right?
Yeah, Michigan is the place. Yeah. So these are the two things. Can we keep this consumerist model going on? And as most of you know, look, 1973, wages are here, right? You're a professor. Let's say you're an associate professor in New York City. You're making about $20,000, $21,000 a year, right? That $21,000 in real wages is still less than $21,000 today, even though you're making $100 or greater plus in 2018, let's say. And the wages completely flat on terms of the real wage. Real wage means real wage, and unions never speak this way. Real wages, because they're always looking at cost of living, which is stupidity. They should always say, what are real wages about? That's actually what it costs to reproduce, yourself. What is the actual cost, it takes to live relative to previous times. And this is lagged, as you see. There's been no gain at all in real wages. Yeah. Everybody says, "Oh, I make $100K a year. Give me a break." That really means, in 1973 terms, right? What you can actually purchase, what you can buy with it, is the equivalent of 20,000, 18 to 20,000, and probably less quality in some senses. It's hard to say. Hard to gauge that. And of course, during this period, the CEO went like this, right? The managerial class. The salaried employees stayed pretty much flat. The middle management and upper management went up a little bit. The workers completely flat, etc. So you've had this period of 45 years now, 45 years of really no growth at all in what you called the real economy earlier on. No growth at all. impossibility. And now everybody talks, am I going to be able to live like my parents lived? This was, And in the 60s, we said we don't want to live like our parents, right? We want a different way of life, right? We want an alternative, et cetera. But now, can I live as well as my parents is the discourse, and you can't, right? Because also what's added to this, remember, CUNY is free here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Remember, education is gone. I mean, I at Johns Hopkins, it cost me, I think it was like about $1,700 a semester. You can't take half a course at this bullshit institution, LIU Brooklyn, for that today. Yeah, right?
The University of California was $375 a year.
Yes, right.
Hunter College.
Hunter College.
Hunter College is 90. I worked at Hunter in the 70s. It was $90 a
90s.
semester.
There you go.
Oh,
$90. And think about this. Think about this relative to
Yeah,
what
that's
you're
right.
making.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're going to convince Sean not to go back to school. But anyway,
I'm taking all the loans. I'm going to die before I pay them off.
Okay, that's cool. I like the way you think. Maybe I should do that.
Or leave the country.
Yeah,
Try to
yeah,
find
I
me.
like that.
Lots of people
You
are
gave
saying
me the
that.
money for free.
Yeah.
I didn't say I was going to pay you back.
Yeah.
It's like the rise of the pirates.
I don't care if I have bad credit. Credit for what?
Right, yeah, credit for what is good. You don't tell the people in Michigan that do the consumer confidence index. Right? But anyway. Right. So anyway, the thing here is that, in terms of a graph, in terms of a statistic, and you saw what Hilferding did, we'll go to that graph. Here you begin to see the level of the debtor economy, the creditor-debtor relationship that is being created, in the past 45 years, of which, I say, Josh and Rachel are part of the first, second wave of this, A lot of us in this room, lived during a period where, it's at least the schools were still affordable, or, the housing was still somewhat affordable, etc. Right? So the idea here has always been, a complete assault on labor. It's a class argument, obviously, at one level, but at the same time, the financialization has made this incredible division of the super rich versus everybody else, right? I mean, this is really what's gone on during this period. And when Nomi Prim says, that there's 28 trillion of, fictitious capital, that's been created, yeah. And there's actually 700 trillion of unanswered derivatives out there floating in space and time.
She says the Fed just any day of the week has $4 trillion ready to just give to anyone
Yes,
who
they
knocks
do.
on the door.
They do. They do.
Not us.
Not us.
Jamie,
Which
Jamie,
door?
that's what we got. We got to wear masks.
Really practice this.
The door?
You better have a gun.
I told you that I took my students to the Federal Reserve Bank, and we went downstairs and all that. Then we come back up, and I'm kind of, talking to one of the guards, a Puerto Rican woman. She was, really kind of lively, and we had a very good discussion. I said, let me ask you something. When you close up down here, how long before it's locked down? She says 9 seconds. I said, I guess the world's fastest sprinter couldn't do that. Said it wouldn't even get 1/4 of the way. Right? So I'm not, she says, you think right though. Asking these questions. Yeah, I'm thinking about, how you're going to pull off the ice. Asking the security guard, be my accomplice in crime, We'll go to San Juan together. Right, anyway. So anyway, so keep this in mind in a way that there's been no real wage growth. And, people that are going into contract negotiation, I'm always in trouble in contract negotiation because I use these terms, I said, we haven't had a raise in 30 years. I start the negotiation and then I show it, right? And of course they're all like, where's this coming from? What does he mean?
Jamie Dyer never told me that.
Yeah. I didn't learn this at the club I go to on Thursdays with all the financial people, right, etc. So anyway, yeah, and of course, what runs it in a way? You have to think about this. When does credit and credit card culture become so dominant? Really, in the 80s it starts, and then it blossoms in the 90s, 2000. Oh no, on Marx of all places. The phone, I can say, okay.
Sorry, guys.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah. No, it's the marks we're worried about. The tablecloth can be cleaned.
Well, you know,
Coffee stained volume 3.
that's
In
right.
terms
Yeah,
of
yeah,
social
sure.
psychology,
Yeah.
it's
Thank
amazing
you.
how often you hear the word growth as soon as you listen to any of these people
Yes.
tell you
it's
to
a
buy
great-
on Wall Street.
that's
It's all
the
growth,
magnificent,
growth.
the magnificent euphemism that's always used.
Yeah.
The end of growth. Really, the book should be written not only the end of work, but the end of growth.
Yeah.
And what does this really mean? Well, this means accumulation. It means more and more and more of accumulation, right? More and more of wages, but that's not happening. And even if the more of wages you get a 1% raise, that means you're usually 2 to 3% behind just the normative cost of living than the actual cost of living.
Don't worry about
Yeah.
that, Phil. It's
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
Don't worry about
We
it.
wash it, don't worry.
Yeah.
It goes well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Worry about the
No
book,
worries,
man.
Yeah.
Worry about the book. Hell with the tablecloth.
The table
That-
is
That's
nice.
bourgeois, man.
Drop
Would rip it off and have the workers come up from underneath the table.
It's
And,
just
Yeah,
a rock
yeah.
club.
yeah, please.
It was something
Yeah.
interesting happened after last class. The next Monday, I was listening to Democracy Now, and I had no idea about they had devalued the currency in India.
Yes.
They like got rid of the 500 and the 1,000 of rupees.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just like
Yes. These are policies that are
Yeah.
done. Think about Venezuela.
yeah.
The level of inflation that's
Yeah.
going on there. Nobody's really studied this. I don't think she's had anybody on for there. Real News has had a few people.
Mhm.
Steve Elner is very good on this, by the way. He's a good guy that comes, to
You either had to put your
often.
money in the bank or it was you had no
Right.
money.
Right.
Well, they're developing a blockchain
Okay.
currency.
Yeah,
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
a cryptocurrency.
Yes, of
Yeah.
course.
They would
of
have
course.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to go there later,
Yeah.
into the crypto. But,
Yeah.
we have to learn the currency first before we understand the crypto. Yes. Okay, please. Yeah. Okay.
So can you talk about that moment after 73 when real wages were not growing and debt started to spiral, but then debt became a profit center of its own, and then GM made the switch into producing cars to
Right.
producing
Right.
credit cards.
Right.
And GM, what was the
General
GMC
Motors
Finance
Acceptance,
or GMAC?
Acceptance Corporation.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like
They'll
acceptance
accept
and
your money.
Monte's.
I mean, how did that
Monte's book.
moment happen
Yeah.
when
Well-
consumers could no longer pay their bills without debt, but
Right.
then the industry said, "Aha, debt is a profit center for us." We're
Yes,
gonna,
I hear you, but let me just say this. First of all, Ford Credit, GMAC, Chrysler, all of these companies already had credit. They're already part of the finance capital thing. This is something that started after World War II, and they became more and more oriented towards banking capital, if you will, or finance capital than just productive capital. That's one thing that they did. This was part of the Whiz Kids. McNamara also was part of that as well. Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense. He was the chairman of Ford Motor Company. And Alfred P. Sloan at General Motors before that. So you have this, and this is why people like Wilson, Charlie Wilson, said what's good for General Motors is good for the country. It was part of that moment of also that they had finance capital going alongside
So that
their
was not
productive
new
capital. It
to
was
begin
not really especially new. So Fordism actually incorporated this ability where you would turn the buyer into a long-term consumer of which you would make extra money. You would make the interest on the loans, right? And part of the come on now to production, it's already built in the price, is interest-free financing. Right, which is a joke, of course, because they're not giving you anything. I mean, it's a way of moving inventory, etc. Yeah. And speaking of which, I'll just make a really short digression here. The Einhorn, who's one of the hedge fund, kings, who's taken a big bath the last 2-3 years. He's a value investor, and he looks for turnaround situation, has a huge bet on General Motors right now. He thinks that
Who does?
David Einhorn.
oh, Einhorn.
Yeah, David, who almost bought the Mets years ago. He's in his probably early 50s. He's one
So
of
he
these
really knows
Wall
a loser
Street
when he
hedge funds.
sees one.
Yes, he does. That's a good point. Very good point. That, Phil, you ought to codify that. They'll pay big money for that. For Bloomberg Business Weekly, I promise you. That's a great slogan for him. But anyway, going back to what you asked, yes, I mean, in here, there was not yet that kind of credit economy created. But when Volcker, put in the huge interest rates, 78, 79 especially, you could get 18% on a CD.
I remember that. I was doing
Yeah.
tenant organizing in DC, helping tenants buy their buildings,
Right.
and prime plus 2 was like 19%.
Yes, that's right.
Trying
That
to
was
get
the loan
financing
capital. I'm
for
talking about the capital rich
19%.
people were making
Yeah.
on their money. The interest capital here, the interest, the return on investment, what is called yield,
Yeah.
the yield rates were as high as 18 to 19% during that period. So then, the Reaganomics comes in, and the switch then is to how are we going to destroy the unions, right, in some ways, but keep somewhat the workers happy. So what they did, they begin this kind of credit system, right, that starts around maybe 83, 84, right? They start loaning out money, right, to people again. You remember New York City, you had a housing crisis and a Wall Street crash in 87, right? Remember this, right? And that the housing was starting to go up. There was a beginning of a renovation, but you had a slump in housing between 89 to 92, but very short-lived housing crisis, 89 to 92. I remember Fort Greene, you could get, for 250,000, a 4-story brownstone on South Portland. I know, no, Rachel, very upset with that. Rachel, I should have known you then. You were,
not that old.
Anyway, okay. So anyway, so at that time, there was a new infusion of, lesser interest rate, less costly money in order to get the game back on track. And this was the advent of Clinton, who was the best thing, for the markets and for capital. Bill Clinton was really the New Deal for speculative capital. This is when it all started in terms of the next level of abstraction. Bob Rubin, and company, these were the people.
And also the next level of internationalization.
Yes, of course. Yeah. You had Mexican crisis before the Brady bonds. You had all these crises going on. Of course, you had the currency crisis. Where will oil be traded? Saddam Hussein, that was the 91 Desert Storm. Okay. Good. Lawnmower or the motorcycle?
Dirt bike.
The dirt bikers, okay. So remember here you have like these moments. 1987 is a huge. That's the first big crash since 29, right? In some ways, since 29. Real estate collapses, right? I'm just this bum in Park Slope, and I got people coming. You want to buy this house on the corner? Real estate people coming up to you, hustling you on the street, right, etc. So 87.
There's a market crash then.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
That's where we're
But
next.
literally,
Stock
huge
market,
market
yeah.
crash.
Yeah.
And this was the
Black
beginning
Tuesday,
of, again, going back to where we started today, Bachelier's thing about the probability based on future events. There were so many bets on that the market would continue, right? That Reaganomics is really working, that it's been good for capital, etc. And boom, it fell out. So the victors here were the people, again, who hedged their bets and went short. My friend with Polio called it right on the money. That was one of his greater moments, right on the money. He had it the same day as the market came down.
He was all in puts.
He was. He
Yeah.
was a short in inputs, and as were his clients. This is why people like Soros would talk to him. Go to visit him, and the hedge fund people, some of them were good, but a lot of people were really wiped out. And this started a whole new moment. But by 1993, you begin to see the upward trend again. However, again, the real wages are not growing, right? What's only growing is credit expansion, right? No longer credit crunches, right? This is what starts to fuel this going forward, is this credit expansion.
Based
Then
on
you get
what
the
money?
dot-com bubble.
The credit expansion based on what source of money?
Well, the printing of money. by
Okay.
The Fed. And
The Fed,
Treasuries.
the
Yeah.
Fed.
Yeah, the Fed policy. Yeah, the Fed policy. Welcome to Mr. Alan Greenspan. Yes, right? Welcome to what's called irrational exuberance at the end of the journey. Right? Yeah, in some ways. So I mean, I hope this, it's fairly basic and, a simple schema, but on the other hand, I think it elucidates some of what happened historically, and we all kind of lived through this. So, 1993, the Clinton years begin, right? You had a couple of bumps in the road, but nothing too significant. You had the 98 Asian contagion, where you had problems with currency and liquidity from Asia that hit the markets a little bit. But this one lasted all the way through the Clinton years, 7 years basically of the dot-com hustle, right, at the time. So people would quit jobs to become day traders, right? This is part of a new culture that emerges. There was no such thing, you would do day trading if you really knew stuff in the 60s, the 70s and stuff. But as it being an occupation and a type, no. The type emerges in the 90s as a type, right? Which you can basically sociologically and psychologically study. So 93 goes all the way up to 2000, when you have the dot-com March of 2000 is the next big slaughter, right? In a way, right? So what happens then, you get George Bush and you get this slump of 2001, but how is this done? You're going to increase the security state, you're going to increase, consumption, you're going to make, again, interest rates slow, and this is when credit default swaps are being formed during the 90s, right? But then they start playing out much more actively during the Bush years, right? Everybody starts getting in the game. Everybody starts to get in the game. So I think this period, 87 till 93, is kind of crucial because it's kind of this holding pattern in which things have gone down enough where they're starting to think of ways, how are we going to build up this without full employment, without real jobs, without real wage growth, and keep the unions under, or labor under control, etc. So what happens is they inflate. I mean, housing costs. If we go back here, I mean, I remember my apartment in New York, 77 was, I think about $275 a month for a 1-bedroom. Yeah, 270. Rachel's shaking her head.
Mine was 260 in the village.
260 in the village. I was 275 on near the Metropolitan Museum.
Right off of Waverly Place.
I was paying $30 a
Square
month
foot.
for a room in a house.
Fair enough.
In Santa Cruz, California.
Yeah. So anyway,
10 times that now.
when you begin to
Or
think
maybe
about
even more.
that, how do you really keep up with the basic, that same 275 apartment in 77, 40 years later, is now, I mean, 3,500. How do you keep up with a 1,300%, increase in your cost of residence, cost of shelter, right, etc. Even though, even though maybe some foods prices relative are, halfway within the ballpark, they're not stupid. Again, they don't starve people to death.
Right.
But you're saying
It's
the
the
jump
frog in a pot of water.
Yeah.
But you're saying the jump in rent from 200 to 3,500 is based on the financialization of the economy?
Yes, of course, yes, constantly,
It's
yeah.
secondary to that.
Yes, secondary to this, yes, absolutely. And it's also a way of defeating people. You kill oppositional culture. Look how hard it is to get 10 people together on a Sunday, I mean, in a sense, given that everybody has to make a living, where's the leisure time? Where's the, time for radical practice, etc.? As you know very well, probably better than all of us here, you don't have these social policies out there or social networks that are really oriented towards, service for people
No, but
anymore.
we do have antidepressants.
Yeah. Lots of them.
Plenty of those. That's why Stiegler calls it,
Tons
the
of
pharmacon.
OxyContin.
Yeah,
Yeah,
pharma
that
capital.
works too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's the next step of financialization, by the way. I think Stiegler understands this. He doesn't articulate it that way, but I think he understands financialization, that the next stage, which Tsoukalos doesn't go there, Tsoukalos is going to go maybe somewhere else, but Stiegler will go to the point of where it's going to be pharma capital. That's what's controlling this, is pharma capital. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The antidepressants, a drug for this, a drug for that, side effects. You know, how do you
But they're
strengthen the
finding out
immune
the drugs
system?
aren't
You
good
know, how
enough.
much this organic food stuff, I mean, I started doing, you know, research about this, how you can eat healthy, how much it costs,
Yeah.
you know, to eat healthy.
Very expensive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well,
Yeah. Except, you know.
said you get good food from.
Yeah, just to stay
Yeah.
away, just to stay away from
Grocery
places.
store.
like-
So again, listen, the idea here, yeah, again,
It's probably necessary, I mean, it is necessary.
again, I think that, you know, bringing up this question, there is no growth, right? There's an abstraction, really, of the creation of more money capital put into the system. And the Fed, and I'll get us a report. I think it'd be interesting for us to read maybe a 10-page Fed's minutes, you know, about money supply, M prime, M2, and M3, about levels of money supply, etc. Because they're always looking at money in terms of demand and supply. This is the way they look at this. You know, yeah, they're looking at, is there enough money in circulation to meet consumer demand? Right? Again, you have to predicate a lot of this on consumption. This is a movement of consumption and sphere of circulation, if you want to use Marx's terms. You know, you're always looking at what is the consumer doing, because this is what keeps it going. This is what keeps the credit economy going, etc. What are we going to consume? And then what is that, how is that related to what's in the sphere of circulation? Right? So you have this kind of different circuit, you know, if you will. Yeah? Consumption to circulation, to the sphere of circulation. Always looking at that kind of dialectical tension between the two. All right? So, yeah, anyway. So, growth, not really a meaningful term. Yeah? It's like healing. You know, healing's not a meaningful term. Healing really means giving the space that you can begin to feel better. It's about a space. It's not about you're going to cure yourself. Give me a break, you know? I mean, it's really about the space that's created for you to feel better, to get what, you know, to get better. That's what therapy really means, the therapeutic, in some ways. And the growth in the economy, there's no growth in real wages. There's no growth in terms of real savings, right? What will the savings buy? Say someone like Rachel and Josh, they have $500,000 by the time they're 60 in their various pensions. That's not going to be any real money the way things are going if you start projecting here. Yeah, yeah. I mean, in a way. Whereas for our job, you know, I mean, you have, you know, yeah, X amount of dollars. It's pretty good, you know, in some ways. Yeah. So you have to start thinking about this. How is the system going to be able to ultimately sustain itself? Right? And what is the principle of the probability? The principle's working and the probability based on the future events. That you have a population that is, you know, if you start with population in a sense, that you have X amount of people that are going to become, 65, by the year 2040, right? How are these people going to be taken care of? How are we going to fund this? Are the pension monies going to be there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, they're hoping for them to die off anyway.
What's that?
They're hoping for them to die off.
They're hoping for most of everybody
Yeah, they're
to
looking for
die
most of
off.
them.
Yes, that's part of the program is to create more and more stress to have people
To
die
die
off.
off.
That's the program.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. That's the biopolitical, thing that it's really a thanatology.
Right.
It's the study of death that we're really looking at. Yes.
Necropolitics.
Yeah.
Did Bill Gates
It's
say
not an
something-
erotic politics of which May of '68 was somewhat based on.
No,
It's the
necropolitics.
reverse of that in some ways. Yeah. Please. Yeah.
Didn't Bill Gates just say something just recently, like in the next 6 months, 30 million people are going to come down with some infectious disease? I just saw something.
Well, he has probably a lot of investment in that 30 million.
Or he's done something for
Yeah,
that
yeah.
30 million.
Yeah.
Knows something.
Yeah. It's like a friend of mine's advised, don't fix your mold in your house. And then we sell it. Don't just sell it as is. And of course, my response is the real estate agent wants the 6% of the extra 50,000-60,000 that you're going to sell it for after you fix the mold. He has not your interest in mind.
Yeah.
He wants the extra commission. Yeah, so it's worth another 1 or 2% to him. It's in his pocket. It's not about her, you know, or his well-being. So
Buy the
anyway,
meds ahead of time,
Yeah.
get the vaccine ahead of
the what? The meds?
Yeah, buy the meds, the vaccine ahead of
Well,
time,
they-
this, whatever this is.
They cut the WHO budget, you know, Trump cut the WHO budget drastically, just as the new Ebola outbreak is happening. And
Yeah, I
so-
feel like what they want is to watch people just die for a few years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where we are.
Well, I don't think they want to watch it. I think that they're looking at statistics and they hey, there's no way we can sustain this unless we redistribute, and they're not going to do that. It's not going to be a redistribution policy. I mean, it's very easy if you start thinking
That's for
about,
sure.
you know, what
Yeah.
if you started to really tax, you know, in some ways, even 1% tax on securities transactions would be enough money to have free education, free health care, you know, and probably the building of very good housing stock
Tobin tax.
for a lot of people. A Tobin tax on the currencies and or on, yes, right, exactly.
Instead they're cutting.
Yeah. Instead, no, there's no tax. And in fact, we pay for this in hidden ways, in many hidden ways, you know, in all kinds of hidden ways.
Our
Yeah.
lives in every sense of the word.
Yeah. So, I mean.
What'd you say, Chris?
With our lives in every
Yeah.
sense of the word, every
Yes,
aspect
right.
of
Well,
living.
financialization has creeped into every part of everyday life. I mean, it's a social phenomenon. It's not just the economics, it's a social phenomenon because it sets up, you know, stresses in relations, it sets up stresses in terms of the workplace, it sets up all kinds of problems in labor capital negotiations where capital has so much the upper hand because labor's afraid. There's fear. That's what's really come down in this world is now this financialization. To my mind, this is where it begins, the administration of fear. That's what the administered world is now. How do we administer fear? You know, nobody really experiences anymore. One walks around in fear. You know, what's next? What's going to happen next? What will happen to me? How am I going to do this? How am I going to survive? These are all the things, and the objects of the fear are never really understood because the understanding, as we talked about with Heidegger, is very limited in all of this. And this is one of the reasons that it's an assault on education. Everything in education is vocational and technical. It's not about understanding and truth-telling or looking at power and power relations anymore. It's about how do you lift your knee to make it better, you know, after an injury, or, you know, how do you do occupational therapy, you know, or what procedure is necessary in the hospital at a certain time. It's all, you know, technical reproduction, if you will, please, yeah.
And if you have a job, you're probably working much harder than before, and you're afraid that, of course, you won't have any job.
Yes, yeah, that's another thing. Well, Marx understood this very well. The harder you work, the less you really make. You know, the harder you work, the less this is, right, in a sense. And this is what they figured out too. Look, the internet for a teacher, you're on 24/7 call. You ought to see the emails that I get, barrage of emails. I'm thinking about not giving my email out anymore. You know, yeah, I mean, you know, why, to do what? To hear about a paper and an excuse at 3 o'clock in the morning? You know, or have to respond, and if you don't respond, they ask, "Oh, I emailed you, Professor," you know, etc. This is additional work, constantly, you know, and the meetings of nonsense too, in order to manage all of this. What really is being stolen? Look, in all of this, we think it's money, you know, only, but really what's stolen here is time. You know, that's what's really being stolen from us. Our lives are being stolen. That's what we are. We are time. I mean, I agree with Heidegger. You know, yeah.
David
The Nazi.
Graeber has
The good Nazi.
a new book called Bullshit Jobs.
Who's this?
David Graeber.
Oh, Graeber.
You know
yeah.
Graeber.
Yeah, I know.
Father
yeah.
of Occupy.
Yeah.
Go bullshit jobs. I mean, it's about how most jobs
Yeah.
are
Well, most people work because
8
they need
hours,
money,
10
not
hours
because
of
they want to
time
work or
wasting.
they're creative
they
and they work.
they accomplish
Right.
nothing, and
Right.
the
That's
people
right.
who do them know it. There are
Right.
very few jobs that are actually necessary.
Right.
And the creative fields are being sort of like run down, like network and advertising, and all the big creatives are basically being kicked out, you know, after a certain age.
Well, it's just kind of formulaic now.
Yeah,
I mean, and they think that
every
the youth will appeal to that great mass market of age 14 to 28 or
But that
whatever it
youth
is.
don't have a cultural understanding, so they
Of
don't
course
understand how to create messages and meaning.
No, of course not.
All they know is flash.
Right.
So yeah, so we they pay them a little bit of money for a lot of flash. So you
Right.
see all the commercials of the same
That's
story
right.
over and over again. Before, there was actual like content. You had like interesting slogans, like even though Apple is Apple, but you know nothing's impossible, whatever it was.
Well, you have the new linguistics, the
Think
alphabet,
Think differently.
Google.
That's it, right?
You have Amazon, the river, and the you know place of the you know the snakes, the anacondas, and you know etc. You have of course Facebook for narcissism. You have all these things that are very real in a way. The Netflix, you know that you're going to be caught in the network of the.
Well, Facebook's
the
more
mo-
like
Yeah.
squashing any sort of like social unrest.
Right.
Yeah.
And Apple is the tree of knowledge, of course, right? The new sin that everybody has to have a part of, right? I mean, the signifiers are pretty easy to figure out. The question is, you know, how do you dismantle that and say, you know, there are positives in this technology that can liberate us, but at the same time, those who control the technology, the relations of production, to use an old language, are not caught up with the forces of production. Right?
Yeah, Apple,
Yeah, yeah.
well, Facebook is, has hired, well, they've formed a partnership with, the Clintonites to,
Oh, yeah.
basically.
I'm tremendously astonished by this.
Yeah.
The Clintons would be involved in something like this.
to you know, to regulate the content of the what people are getting.
Just
on
don't
Facebook.
talk about me.
But also
I
expanding
feel
it
your
around the
pain.
world.
Don't talk about
Yeah.
me.
Right, they're doing these initiatives to get like internet into like places in
Right.
Africa or you know
Right.
the Skull
Right.
South,
Yeah.
but basically just to make sure they have access to you, to market to you,
Right.
to have pedagogical control over you know
Right.
shaping of the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they'll pretty soon. Well, I don't know. Who knows what will happen? You know.
But that's the thing, the means of production. Like technology is supposed to be able to free us.
Well, I mean, it's a question of, in Marxist language, it's a question that the relations of production are not really caught up with the forces of production. That the productivist moment and its forces, you know, are so much far ahead of how the relations of production could possibly be predicated on liberation from work. This is really the problem. You have this great gulf between what's being produced and what can be actually accomplished in the workplace, or the freedom from work in some ways too. You know, because that's a sacrilege from the dominant capitalist ideology.
Yeah, and what's being studied is the monetization of desire.
Yes, of course. That's constant. And what is desire? I mean, you know, you look at these phones now. I mean, they're recharging. These people that are always texting, they're getting a rush. This is a new kind of addiction that's really got them going. You know,
So
I mean,
don't-
it's constant. You have this texting culture. I mean, it's an obsession. I've been witnessing this with somebody. I mean, it's insanity as far as I'm
It causes
concerned.
anxiety.
Yeah.
But that's what they asked Zuckerberg during the Senate hearings
Uh-huh.
about the research, because we knew that back in 2009, 2010.
Sure, of course.
Before Cambridge Analytica came out, they were talking
Yes.
about that. So when Cambridge Analytica came out, we were like, wait a second, this is old news. We knew this.
Yeah.
Way
Yeah.
Like
Way
years
old.
old.
Yeah.
But think about the neurological, the wiring, what's happening with memory, what's happening in human relations, you know? I mean, think if you don't respond to the last text and you wait 2 or 3 texts later to respond, the confusion that starts happening. Think about this in terms of dialogics, that there's no communication possible anymore. It's all méconnaissance, misknowledging, miscommunication that's happening. And which basically Trump is a major symptom of this, you know, with his Twitter. You know, this is no accident again that they're using this to go on. They understand this, I think,
Yeah.
very well. I mean, I don't think there's, again, that he's just this moron. Maybe he is a moron, but the handlers behind him, you know, are you know, certainly figuring out stuff about what the culture's really about.
Yeah, it took them about a year to get him down.
Okay.
And
fair
now
enough.
I think they've got him.
Yeah.
But the the titans of Silicon Valley don't send their kids to schools that do not allow screens at all, because they absolutely know that they created something which is
Yes, of
dangerous
course.
and
Yeah,
addictive.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes.
They don't want their kids
Well,
raised with
as
it. But
Graham
ours
Leonard
kids
And that
have-
goes hand in hand with the antidepressants,
Yeah.
because you're seeing a rise of like people taking Xanax and all stuff because of the fact that they are being affected by
Yeah.
what's coming in this little screen.
Yeah,
Because it does induce anxieties.
yeah, and then no attention span left for anything
No.
meaningful.
People watching TV
And it
5
also
hours
creates
a
fake
day.
knowledge. Like
Yeah.
fake knowledge, fake understanding.
Information, not
Yeah.
knowledge.
Yeah. Well, they think it's knowledge.
Data,
Yeah.
data.
Yeah.
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 Data. Yeah.
I mean, as your friend Leonard Cohen says, the rich have their channels
In the bedrooms of the poor.
Right? That sums it up. Right? In
Boy,
many ways.
was that prescient.
Yes. And that was in the 90s.
That is
The
crazy.
rich have their.
Channels in the bedrooms of the poor.
The surveillance society.
Well, the screens.
Yeah.
Yes, what
Yeah.
you're talking about is really the screen culture, which is a new mode of production too. This is another thing. We're way beyond, since you brought up earlier the GMAC and the Ford credit, Fordism is now at a very different level. It's a screen. There's screen cultures. It's the new Fordism is about this. This is what the consumption is, and the relations are between pharma capital, bio capital, and the quote unquote individuation process, which is no longer a process. It's no longer a process. This is another problem we're facing. I mean, this is a complete disaster. I mean, put it mildly, what we're going through at this point. I mean,
We don't have individuation, you have the construction of a self
Yes.
Yeah.
for
Yes,
consumption.
absolutely.
But the same
Absolutely.
self. The
Purely
same
for,
self.
or whatever self you want. You can have it. No one knows you're a dog on the internet.
I'm not a robot. I'm not a robot. Yeah, no, absolutely.
That book
Yeah.
you recommended, 24/7, is very eloquent.
Oh, did you like it? Yeah, he's a good writer. Jonathan's a
Really
good
good.
writer. Good, I'm glad. Yeah, I love Jonathan Crary, 24/7. It's a very good thing. It begins with the White Sparrow and the ability of the White Sparrow to go 7 days without sleep, and how DARPA has spent $1 billion studying this little white sparrow, and he goes from there. About the last frontier that capitalism wants to steal is our sleep.
What's his last name again?
I don't remember.
Crary. Since you go to some of these things at
Yeah,
Columbia,
you said
sometimes
you
he
read.
speaks
We
there.
have it, yeah.
From the art faculty of
it's quick.
Rosalind
Yeah,
Rouse,
yeah.
Benjamin Buchloh, and Jonathan Crary are all at Columbia. I think Benjamin left. Very good book called, also if you're interested in perception, studies in perception, his book called Techniques of the Observer is a wonderful text on learning to see. Anyway, I was going to do a couple of other things, and I think that maybe it's almost 4 o'clock. Anyway, if you turn to going back to again where Beth was about this whole credit system and how did this occur on page 145 in the stock exchange. And if you want to ask questions, I'm certainly
145.
Yeah, 145 in the Hilferding. Yeah, and it begins. The sentence is. And another distinctive feature of stock exchange transactions is the speed in which they're conducted. Okay? And I want to emphasize once again speed. This is in the section called the stock exchange, which results from a certain informality of procedure. The rapidity is due essentially to the need to take advantage of slight short-term price fluctuations. So you can see fundamentally Hilferding has down flash trading. Yeah. So I wanted to go there for a second. Okay? And the rapid changes in supply and demand, and remember they're specialists that have paper. I've got 20,000 shares of General Motors, and I've got 5,000 bid at $20.35. I've got 20,000 asked for at $20.50. Right? I've got a buyer and a seller, and this is the way it works. In terms of inventory, this is why he uses the language here of supply and demand, right? There is a supply and demand going on, and the speed with which market quotations vary make it extremely important to conclude transactions as fast as possible. Every new turnover gives speculators a new possibility to make a profit. You know, you can clip very quickly, right? You buy low at 12 o'clock, you sell high at 3:30. Yeah, and some people can do this. There are people that sit there all day long. I mean, I've seen this at work. I don't do it, but you know, I've seen it at
Or at
work. Where they're
12
looking
o'clock.
at charts all day long. They have multiple screens operative, right? And they're looking. This is 2041. They've got a line drawn through there. It's going to go to 2060. So they'll put up, you know, for that 20 cents, right? You buy, you know, 10,000 shares. You make some money, right? Right? You make $2 grand, right? In an hour or something like that. That's always this expectation of this kind of mentality of the speculator, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, playing that odds. That's the futures on which the expectation. It has nothing to do, again, with the scientific investigation, if you will, or the mathematical investigation of, you know, what the company will actually make with a profit, right? Exactly what they make or whatever. This is based completely on trends, tendencies in lines and charts, etc. Right? Right? This is a completely different. You know, so it's in the second part of the speculative capital of Bachilier's you know, theory of speculation. You know? So always think in terms of mathematical and then probability. You know, even though mathematics is involved in probability, the mathematical pure and simple, the a priori, is only what the desire is today by the Diallos, the Mercers, the the quants, etc. Whereas the other one, the probability, is much more what happens. And as you said, added the preposition of is both the future on, right? Future on future events as well as of future events, right? So the mode of prediction, to use that title of this new book, is that capitalism at one level, in terms of speculative capital, is now in a mode no longer of production only, but a mode of prediction. This is where we are. I mean, I must get 50 offers every week for life insurance. You know, and I'm close to, the end. I mean, I'm not really close to the end, but anyway, but I mean, I'm getting
You were
Closer.
years ago.
closer than I was a few years ago. Maybe not with the way I'm going. I'm not interested in the reverse. Right. Anyway, I'm trying.
You were taking more
I'm trying.
you were taking more chances
I'm
back
not
then.
taking my chance. Yeah. Anyway, but so this is again part of this culture of a mode of prediction. And this goes back, maybe I should make a copy of Leibniz's principle of sufficient reason, because a lot of this is based on, the principle of sufficient reason, not certainty, but sufficient reason. When people say it's a necessary but not a sufficient reason, they're referring to Leibniz's notion of the sufficient reason. So maybe I'll bring that next time. I'll make a photocopy of, because Leibniz invents, the calculus for our times, as well as he's thinking through this. He may be the thinker behind insurance actuarial tables. Very interesting at another level. Yeah. So, all right. So let me go on. So any turnover gives speculators a new possibility to make a profit. 145, middle of the page. Hence, any time-consuming formality is abhorrent. It's an obstruction, right? If you have a formalization. And in this sphere, the expression "time is money" is literally true. Smart guy, this Hilferding. Hence, also, the hostility to any legal specification of settlement times and to legislative intervention in general, which could always involve the loss of time. So when you're in the trading day, you are not subject to laws, right, that somehow will interfere with that actual movement of flow of capital. You have none of those hindrances, right?
No friction.
Yeah.
No friction.
No friction. Okay. So that's one of the attractive parts. 52%, I think I said this 2 weeks ago, of the Princeton graduates want to go into investment banking. 52%. All right, let's go on. Futures trading.
I'm sorry, does anyone happen to know where he is in the Marx's Internet Archive paging?
No.
Okay, never mind.
Oh, is it? Well, I'm in chapter 7.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in the stock exchange. And I'm about, see the functions of the stock exchange, which is section 2.
Well, the Marxist
Section 3.
Internet.
Well, no,
it
I'm in
calls the
chapter.
stock exchange chapter 8.
Yes,
So-
but I'm in a section called the function of
If
the
you
stock
slow it down,
exchange, number 2.
It's
Yeah.
censored.
Function of the stock
Yeah,
exchange.
and I'm at the end of this, almost at the end of it, I'm the second to last page, I'm sorry, I'm in the third section, stock exchange operations.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, I'm gonna go back over this very carefully at LIU on Thursday, but, we're just trying to get a sense of it now. Okay, so stock exchange operations, and Beth, it's like 6 paragraphs in.
Got it.
It begins another distinctive feature, and
Got
now futures trading. Okay, which defers, and this is an interesting verb again, the delayed effect, like Freud's Nachtraglichkeit, deferred action, defers the completion of all transactions to the same date is the best way to take advantage of credit. Right? Since such transactions are mainly the work of speculators, buying and selling are synchronized in such a way that most of the transactions offset each other, leaving only the balances to be settled in money, and most of these payments, for the matter, are also settled by credit or book transfers in the banks at the end of the day when they settle up the accounts. Right? Money may be needed in cases where there's only a sale or purchase, but such transactions are few compared in which cancel each other out. Here too, the effective credit is to expand the market. I'm advancing you something into the future, and you can speculate on this. We'll balance it out at the end of the day. So for example, if you have an open margin account at a brokerage house, you have $100,000 in it, doesn't mean you only have $100,000 to play with. It means you have 150, maybe 175, because the brokerage company will advance you credit on that and give you much more, right? Because you have the stake capital, you can go further. I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna turn it off, yeah. So this is another, I'll just let it break, okay. If you don't mind, we'll turn it off in a second. So again, the deferred, the key here is the defer of the completion of transactions on the same day. So you can continue to hold in the stock exchange, and you know the language, short term, long term. David Bowie, for example, has bet on himself. They created a package of his future earnings that they sold bonds in, right? And they go out for 50 or 60 years, and he raised capital for projects that way. This is the kind of things we could think of.
Amazing,
Yeah. Yeah, in some ways. I'm not against using the system against itself. I read the manifesto very carefully. Take the weapons of the bourgeoisie and turn them against them, right? And they better know the weapons well. This is the part of why we read this stuff and we're looking at, to find out what these weapons are and how they could be used. Because it ain't going away, folks. They'll blow up the planet before they'll get in. I promise you. This is how mad they are. I've heard some of these people talk. It's unbelievable, what they think about.
Well, you watch what they do.
Well, of course, that goes without saying. What went on in Gaza this week, is an absolute, it's outright atrocity. And if there's not more activity against this or a boycotting of the New York Times, that's another thing, the way that was reported.
Yeah.
The Daily News was 100% better.
Yep.
Oh, 100%.
And then they get people to come in to justify under the horizon of we need balanced, objective reporting. Give me a fucking break. Excuse my language.
Yeah.
We'll get censored from YouTube.
No.
Well, the Times
The
was
Israeli part, not for
The
that.
Israeli part, I already know that. I heard you there. I can see Shlomo looking in. Yeah, okay, Shlomo. Right.
That's rapidly becoming illegal. Yeah.
What?
They're criticizing Israel.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point.
Oh, yeah.
South
absolutely.
Carolina, I
Okay.
think, has a statute under consideration
Yes.
to sanction the criticism
Right.
of Israel. I don't think it's going to pass, but
No, I hear
it's
you.
out there.
Yeah, well, Schumer was pushing it
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
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 State agencies.
Yeah.
So let me just go on with this for a second, okay? So So most of the payments are settled by credit or by book transfer. Money may be needed in cases when there's only a sale or purchase. The effect of credit is to expand the market. Futures trading, and this is why futures trading operates in capitalism, allows a great extension of operations. Securities which are dealt in future delivery always found a market. This is the options market. This is the derivative market. All of these markets will ultimately find a market. This is why people sit around Goldman Sachs writing out these programs, these new things. Write me a program about carbon. Write me a program about marijuana, et cetera, et cetera. The legalization, two things to look at very actively right now is the legalization of marijuana and how Wall Street will deal with this and what programs will be written and who's going to benefit. And secondly, of all the carbon futures trading, et cetera, and how you build credits on this and what that market looks like. And of course they're getting into, and the third aspect is, of course, is the cryptocurrencies. They want a piece of this. The minute they see something, like vultures, they're ready. Whatever the carcass is, or if it looks halfway good, or if they can put some salt and pepper on it, or whatever, they're ready to
Suck out the juice.
Absolutely, right? One racket after another. So anyway, the aim is not simply, furthermore, since actual possession of the securities, and you don't hold on. I mean, I'm sure everybody in this room that has an account has never seen a stock certificate from that account.
I don't even
Yeah?
know what that is.
Yeah? All right. Since actual possession of the securities is not involved while speculating in the futures, but the aim is simply to make a marginal profit. And the securities can be sold at any time. The extent of the commitment is determined not by the price, but only by the amount of the marginal difference may arise from the speculation. At the same time, the securities actually available on the market are required only to the extent that the speculative operations of buying and selling do not cancel themselves out. Do not cancel out. The volume of dealings entered into is therefore likewise independent of the total sum of prices for the securities actually available in the market and can be many times that amount. So for example, you have the securities of, let's take a highly traded stock like Apple. It may trade multiple trillions of dollars a day in volume, right? But the capitalization is only 800 billion. I say only, right? But the market itself is allowing for trading up to the exchange of trillions of dollars in one day because of the volume, right? So this is an interesting thing that Hilferding is intuiting, or actually theorizing about well in advance. Yeah.
So it wasn't happening in his day?
Well, it was happening, but not to the degree like today. And again, going back to this little, very schematic, the 73 to today period, you have to remember there's very little trading volume. A 10 million share day is a big deal back in the 70s. Today, that happens in a nanosecond. That's another thing too that you're thinking about. What they call on Wall Street wealth creation. Wealth creation. Wealth creation.
Yeah.
And there's wealth management, wealth builders, wealth advisors, right? Anyway, this whole language that came out of this, in a way. So I think it's important to remember that again, alongside of this expansion of the credit system, the reliance on the Fed to open the windows anytime and mandate a new demand on the Treasury to print more money, we need more in circulation, also has increased trading. And you can see this in the advertising world with a kid with E-Trade. You remember these stupid things with a kid in the crib?
Yeah.
She's taking away my thing, and then he pulls out his little portable phone after, he can't trade anymore.
Right.
Ha ha ha, I've got an iPhone before the iPhone comes out. And, anyway, yeah. So, this is, sometimes it's good to study Madison Avenue.
Oh, it is.
Right?
Yeah.
Very well, right? So, anyway, again, the trading day itself is exchanging so much more than the actual, quote, how shall I say this? Maybe real value of these companies. What are their products worth? What is the inventory? What is the plant and equipment? What is the brain count? Everything of that kind of nature allow is magnified thousands of times in this trading day, right? So you have a kind of, I mean, look, for lack of a better metaphor, a floating casino in a certain way.
Well, how about,
with multiple games?
The
Yeah,
metaphor
maybe a better
of
one.
musical chairs.
Yes.
Like,
okay.
it stopped in 2008, and everyone rushed for the doors, but everyone couldn't get out because of the leverage.
It's
is-
because of the leverage, and yes, they faced a major
Because-
liquidity
Is that right?
crisis,
Because there's
yeah.
just so much
Yeah.
commitment on future profit circulating
Yes,
compared to actual, I don't know if you want
Right.
to use the word value, but
yes, yes. And also, I mean, you know, if you think about that too.
as long as the music
maximum-
keeps going, it keeps
the-
circulating.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what
Yeah.
you're talking about with
Yeah.
circulation.
Yes, indeed, it keeps circulating, right. And you know, as Morgan said, when there's blood on the streets, buy. So you have to remember there are people there that made a lot of money off of this, including Paulson, who's now losing money in the bull market. Einhorn made money. You know, all these people that are, you know, quote, the hedge fund kings were making money in 2008, 2009. And look, where we've gone, think about it this way, the markets are up 300 and maybe 20% from their lows in March of 2009. The Dow Jones average, I'll use that as a marker. Maybe more for other indexes. But just the Dow 30, right? Which is an agglomeration of key stocks, including Apple, Microsoft are in the index. U.S. Steel is still there, General Motors. So anyway, taking that into account, 325% increase on the indexes, in a period of less than 10 years, that's compounded out at about 20% a year. Your average wage increase in the teaching profession is about 1.8% each year. So there's something here, in terms of the come on, the desire, as well as the skewed notion of what value is, right? In many ways. So this was, again, a concerted effort to keep, I think, in some ways, the pension company funds afloat, because if you have that problem, can you imagine the teachers waking up tomorrow and say, my pension's wiped out? They would go on strike.
Well, they did. I mean, that is what happened in Arkansas.
In Arkansas.
Yeah.
But not in
Yeah.
New York or California.
Because
Or not the union.
Because they didn't have TIAA correct,
Right. Right. Whose manager comes from Solomon Brothers, and which is defunct, but that's the place that gave Michael Bloomberg the golden parachute of, that started Bloomberg News back in the day. He got fired with $10 million to go home. Anyway, so this is important to keep in mind that you're dealing with so many more levels of these abstractions in terms of the sphere of circulation when you start thinking about markets. It's not really connected to a reality that we know, or to value we know, or for even that matter, even the base of the exchange. What does General Motors do, right? There's something else that General Motors is doing that includes billions and billions of dollars above what they actually do, because you'll write derivatives. General Motors stock in 2020 will be $40. Give us, $1,000 with a promise that you're going to make, 10, 15,000 in the future. And then that money just goes by the wayside. It goes back into the sphere of circulation if the bet doesn't work out. So you have bets on bets on bets on bets on bets ad infinitum in some senses. That the infinite is playing here. There is an affinitude to it in some ways. And this is one reason they keep it going, why it's become so sophisticated in certain ways. That's how they, because it's an infinite, recreation and creation of these products, etc. Okay, just one other thing. Yeah, were you going to ask a question? Please.
Is this diagram here on
Yeah.
in the chapter 7? It's the first diagram,
Yeah.
figure 1.
Yeah.
That's diagramming this process, right?
It is diagramming the process. It's a good diagram.
Yeah.
This is for Beth. It's about 6 pages into Joint Stock Company. Section 1 is figure 1.
Yeah.
Um,
So you-
about the
branches
circulation, yes, of of shares, how they're issued. So say Sean wants to do a new Madison Avenue company, but he wants to take it public, and he calls it, Talent Source, corporation or something like that, or Ideas Incorporated or something. So he goes to the brokerage house and he says, I want to do an IPO, an initial public offering.
Right.
They say, well, we're going to have to issue shares that we're going to sell to the public, sold for money, right? That's the first step, right? So this constitutes the promoter. The promoter in this case is the Goldman Sachs or the Schwab or whoever, that's going to underwrite this, their profit. They're going to get clipped. Sean, we don't do this for free. We're going to have to take, if you want 1 million shares at $10 a share, so that 10 million we're going to raise for you, we want our 10%, our 1 million, right? So that's the first step, right? So they're issued, they're sold for money, so the money is the promoter, right? And then he drops out of circulation that $1 million. The guy at Goldman Sachs says, I'm going to go to Sean's cousin next and give him the same deal, and I'll do the same thing, but it's not going back into Sean's company, right?
And that's the way the banks continue to perpetuate.
Right, well, they're the investment banks in this case, not banking capital per se, but the investment guy. So the other part is converted into productive capital, into industrial capital, that somehow it becomes a product, right? You begin to production something, right?
That's the same as always.
Right.
And that's why, the products continue to be made, but there's entirely different capital on top of that.
Right, and he says this is already familiar to us because he's living in the period of which the debate is around industrial capital and financial capital. And he's showing how industrial capital becomes part and parcel of this process of financialization. This is what he's trying to do. That's why I titled the book Finance Capital, and is looking at this, because industrial capital stays the same. This is in volume 1 of Marx. This is in volume somewhat in the schemes of reproduction too. Marx is always about industrial capital, and this is what he's famous for. Of course, Marx said he's the one who describes the mode of production of industrial capitalism better than anyone. What we're trying to do, in a sense, with Marx and kind of extract is that he also understood, even though it had not been developed as a complete form, financial capital at this point, and what fictitious capital is, even though he doesn't really flesh it out in these volumes, he gives us hints towards it, right? And in that way. So anyway,
It's kind of vague.
And he's vague, yes, he is. He's vague because he's only got so much data in front of him. If he was here today, he would have Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Barron's, Investors Business Daily, spreadsheets, the Federal Reserve minutes, certain banking, investment banking house policy. This would be all on his desk, and he would be reading this and theorizing from it, extracting from it a theory, the theory of the derivative, if you will, which could be the 4th volume of Capital. That you're in a circuit now of MDM, that you're no longer an MCM or M prime, right? Or you're no longer in these circuits. It's a new circuit of capital.
So you would add a branch to this graph, basically?
I'm sorry?
Would you add a branch to this graph to put the derivatives in there?
Well, yeah, you could put the derivative as going back into M2, right?
Right.
Yeah,
So you could
M2 is the next stage. You would go back, right, to M2 PC, right, and then you'd have a new M2 cycle, right, circuit, right. Yeah. So this is it's an interesting model here, but again, I mean, it's very basic.
Yeah.
Well, we can go back to this. He has many figures here, right, and we can talk about principle and issue. All right. So anyway, just to mention once again 2 things, and then we'll close up. Securities and speculation on the stock exchange set. I would read that carefully. We'll begin there. He says. On 137, going back to where we began today, at the bottom of the page, second to last, the last sentence before the last paragraph on 137. For you, Beth, I think it's about 7 paragraphs in, securities and speculation, stock exchange. Stock market speculation is like a game of chance or a wager, but for insiders, going back to where we started today, kind of come full circle, it is a wager à coup sûr. Right, of certainty, right? So this is what they want to do of certainty. Stock market speculation is like a game of chance or a wager, but for insiders it is a wager of certainty. Oops, right? Of certitude. That's the French saying for certainty, obviously. It's about 8 paragraphs. Let me see.
In
1,
section
2, 3,
In
4,
section 1?
5,
It's section-
6, 7, 8,
It's
9,
chapter
10,
8, right?
11, 12, 13, 14 paragraphs or 15 paragraphs into section, chapter 8, section 1, securities and speculation.
Okay.
Okay? Yeah, it's just a good definition to kind of finish with, that the mathematical and the futures of probability, based on future events, are being, predicated here. Right?
And what's the
In this
first sentence
proposition.
of that paragraph again?
the purchase and sale of commodities. Se-
No,
No?
securities and speculation. I'm
Next
sorry.
paragraph?
Yeah, securities and speculation. And the first sentence, furthermore, changes in the rate of interest. Yeah, this is chapter 8, section 1. It's just a sentence that kind of sums up, some of this opening about the a priori and the a posteriori. Yeah.
But you said, read that last part of that sentence again, because I can't find it in here.
Stock market speculation is like a game of chance or a wager. Okay? The probability based on future events. But for insiders,
Right,
it's a
that's the part.
wager that is certain.
Right,
Certainty.
right. That's
Can't
section,
find
that's,
that either.
that's what I was,
Yeah.
on the, what was it, the term?
A coup sûr.
Uh,
It's a French term.
Based
It
on.
means certain, based on.
It was based on.
Yeah, based on.
That's the based on part you were
Yes,
talking about earlier.
yes,
That's what I was talking
exactly.
about earlier.
Yes.
That you could use work backwards.
You get better
versus
stock market tips at the New York Athletic Club than you're gonna get from the pundits on TV or your own careful analysis. You'd probably make much more money if you're taking steam baths at the New York Athletic Club or at, some of these expensive health clubs than you do by doing due
Because
diligence.
that's where the Wall Street people are?
Well, I don't know, I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm using,
But
that's
that's
an
the
old
idea.
model, that's the idea.
Titans of
yeah.
industry,
The old model.
leaders of the state.
Yeah, yeah.
Lots of
No,
notes going
finance
on.
capital, they're not titans of industry anymore. It's not like that.
That's true.
Yeah,
right, right,
this
right.
is the problem, we have a new ontological type here. This is the interesting part. What is the speculator as a type? In a way I hope we're doing somewhat of a Nietzschean typology here on top of a topology, the place of all of this, and trying to understand it in that way as well as appropriate their weapons, to understand, how they operate, and, not that we're gonna figure it all out and become billionaires, but, even if we do, we need to know where the executions will take place, Right? Yeah, anyway, yeah. What Greek island? I don't think we should benefit them so much. Maybe we'd do the Stalinist move, Siberia, the Trans-Siberian Express, the titans of industry.
They have their bunkers. They're not gonna
Tell
come
me
above
about
ground.
it. Tell me about it. That-
They're not gonna be available. Their necks aren't gonna be available.
They have them out in Long Island. So,
And around the world.
all around the world. They know how much hatred and resentment is building up.
It's scary.
It's just scary.
Oh, I hope they're right.
Well, you might, I hope you're right too, yeah, I mean, yeah.
I don't think they are.
No. You don't think they're right about that? You think they're just gonna be able to administer this out in phenomenon?
I don't wanna be pessimistic.
It's okay.
I mean, the thing is,
Nietzsche advented the century, this is a very
We're
pessimistic
arguing whether or
moment.
not this would go
Freud
on
and
forever.
Nietzsche were both
We're arguing whether or not this
pessimists
would
to
go
the
on
left.
forever.
And I'm not so sure Marx believed in
Well,
progress
I just in
either.
terms
Marx
of
believed in
resistance, I think it's
overturning
like
and
about
inverse
techniques of
and
servitude,
thinking
what
this
he's
through and displacements, but at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm not so sure Marx thought, he thought that we're not really human. That's what he really thought. Marx says you cannot be human, a human being under capitalism. Yeah, it's impossible. It stunts the growth if we cannot develop our senses. This is the appeal of Marx always to me, is that, we're prehistory in terms of our development. We're prehistory in terms of what the human can become. We're prehistory in terms of our development of our senses. We don't really hear or see or, this is not really our possibility at this stage. Given the barragement of images, the technology, we're talking here about the phones and the addictions and the big pharma and all these things. We're not living, in a lot of ways. I mean, I hate to put it, in those kind of terms, but it's really true. And everything is surface experience. It's no longer depth. There's no longer depth. I can talk to a lot of people. I cannot have deep, really deep conversations where you deepen the conversation conceptually or ideationally to the point of where you're really going to be involved in a dialogue.
I mean, the tech progress is really an incredible psychosocial regression.
Yes.
So it's affected that.
Yes. So, and then this will be a theme in Stanley's class too, the whole thing about pessimism, but he won't use that term because he's more of an optimist. I mean, Stanley's Rousseauian at some level. He believes in the goodness of human nature. I don't believe in human nature to begin with, but anyway. But anyway, I mean, there's a debate here between Rousseau and Nietzsche, and there's also a debate, to my mind, in terms of thinking the future. Is there going to be a Rousseauist Marxism, to think of it that way, that somehow we were free in nature and that we are essentially good and it's society and the social and historical conditions that corrupt us? Or is it a Nietzschean Marxism of where, yes, there's always going to be the ideology, despite whatever system we go under, right? But how do we develop, this overman or this, new type of being? What are the conditions for that birth? But it's very pessimistic, the Nietzschean Marxism. It doesn't have that idea of evolutionary progress or of that goodness will triumph in the end, right? Adorno's about the devil giving the soul back, not about salvation and redemption comes through the middle. The devil is the middleman in Dr. Faustus. It's an interesting take, from postmodernity that an Adorno would think this way. I mean, he's really a pessimist in a way. Yeah. Anyway, so I mean, I don't think it's bad, Beth, if you're a pessimist about to make a long story short.
Yeah.